27.
The answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great, great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you are not
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, good morning, and happy Friday to you. It's glorious to have your company. Probably not so glorious for you if you were supposed to be flying somewhere exotic and wonderful today, and if that flight was supposed to be coming out of Heathrow, because you may well have woken up to the news that one of the world's busiest airports, indeed our busiest airport, where did you know planes take off and land every second from Heathrow, well, it's closed. The whole thing, gone. Shut down until at least midnight tonight. Apparently, a nearby electrical substation has caught a blaze quite voraciously, one could say. And so they're clamouring to try and get power back to that airport. But of course, if your flight is diverted, sent to another airport, the domino effect, the ongoing ripples of chaos will continue for many days to come, no doubt. Me being me, of course, I look at these things and I think, is this a deliberate infrastructure attack? Most of our infrastructure in the UK is unguarded. There's no one there to protect it, to make sure nefarious deeds can't be carried out. And, well, it's the playbook of certain foreign entities who may wish to cause us harm, particularly when we're sticking our beaks into what they might consider their geopolitical affairs. Anyway, we're going to be giving you updates on that breaking story throughout the day, let you know about travel disruption, let you know what comes out of the investigation into what has occurred to cause Heathrow to shut for such a long period of time. Meanwhile, we're learning of passengers whose flights are being diverted all over the place, not just to the UK, other airports around Europe, some even turning on the head of a pin and having to go back from whence they came. A lot of unhappy passengers out there. So stay tuned if you want to find out more on how this might affect your travel plans. Meanwhile, in the news, well, you like me have probably found out your council tax has gone up yet again. Everything's going up, isn't it? I mean, I can't remember the last time I had a message going, guess what? This bill is going to be coming down ever since we had that massive global inflation. The thing is, they might say, oh, look, inflation is down to 4% or something. Well, that means it's still getting more expensive by 4%, and that previous huge hike you saw just stays in place. Well, council tax has been going up all over the country. And at the same time, the Labour Party, when they first came into power, in that King's Speech, decided they wanted to devolve many more competencies to local councils, make local councils deal with the things that governments would have to deal with. And as it's turned out, that the things they're supposed to be doing, well, they're not really doing very well, are they? Especially when it comes to collecting bins. Right, shall we get our teeth into all the things we have to moan about today and enjoy some communal catharsis? I think so. If you want to join the conversation and throw in your 2-bit, the number to call is 0344 499 1000. That's your standard network rate. You can also use that number to send me a WhatsApp message, or indeed leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. Don't send me any pictures though, because I can't see them. People often do. I sort of look at my screen, they're like, oh, have you seen? No, I'm like, I can't open it on my sort of Cape Canaveral here. It's only for urgent messages. If you want to text me, the number is 87222. You've got to write the word talk before your text. That way it finds its direction through all of those redirected flights cluttering up the sky, circulating over the coastlines of Britain because they can't land in Heathrow, and it pings the masts on top of Talk Towers. And we're on next at talkTV. Right, let's get on with getting on, shall we, and speak to Kevin Hollenrake, who's the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary. Kevin, great to have you on the programme. Before we get into all the things that are falling apart at a local level, let's talk about Heathrow, shall we? I mean, major disruption, unprecedented to have the airport closed until at least midnight tonight. Are you learning anything from colleagues in government about what might be going on?
Well, obviously it's not my brief, but you...
I think he's had a bit of an earpiece malfunction. Let's just give him a bit of a moment to plug himself back in. We can't have that, can we? It happens to the best of us, believe me. Most of those earpieces are designed to fit circus elephants, and if you've got anything other than a giant-sized lug hole, it kind of gets squeezed out. Kevin, are you back with us? Well, there's a fire at Heathrow. That's pretty much what's going on with the programme, isn't it? We're up in flames right now. We're trying to get Kevin back. Don't you worry about that. I'm sure we will. Like I said, earpieces are annoying, fiddly little bits of things, or the tricks of television that you don't know. I've got my own little earpiece here, which is good, but sometimes you even have to tape it onto your head. It's not a glamorous industry, believe me. Kevin, not a glamorous industry, indeed. Are you now wired up and ready to communicate?
Yeah, I can hear you.
There we go. Don't you worry. It is, it happens to the best of us, my darling. Right.
Yes.
You said it's not your brief. I understand that, but it's just, when people are in, the sort of corridors of power and circulating in politics, they're in WhatsApp groups, they're exchanging messages. I just wanted to know if you knew anything that we might not.
I don't really think I do, other than you've got to commend the firefighters for getting the blaze under control. And but it seems extraordinary that something as important to the UK economy like Heathrow is dependent on one substation. Seems to be no resilience around that. So I'm sure after the immediate problem is resolved, there'll be some questions asked, and hopefully contingencies put in place for future potential problems.
Right, it actually reminds me of the time talking about resilience and preparing for these sorts of issues when all those flights got cancelled because the computers crashed at air traffic control. You kind of think, come on, UK, sort yourselves out. Right, let's talk about, come on, UK, sort yourselves out. Let's talk about the delivery of local services, because as Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, this story must be very close to your brief, which is the fact that council tax bills are going up yet again. Inflation-busting tax rises. The overwhelming majority are imposing the maximum council tax now permitted, and yet it seems to me public services are in disarray, particularly things like bin collection.
Yeah. Well, I've got to say, lots of councils are under pressure because of the cost of adult social care, home to school, transport, temporary accommodation, children with special needs. There are some real pressures on councils, so I do have sympathy with some councils, the majority, but there are some that have been profligate with their spending, and some are crazily badly run, like Birmingham and Bradford, for example, who seem to waste money and have got facing these strikes. They can't sort their workforce or the unions out. But I've got to say, I reserve special criticism for Keir Starmer, who promised prior to the general election that he would freeze council tax, not 1 penny extra on your council tax this year, and instead people are facing an average increase of £109. And no, not 1 penny, £109. It's totally wrong that you'd raise expectations like that, make promises like that in opposition, and then quite cynically you've then gone against those pledges. So another broken promise from Sir Keir.
You talked then about certain councils going into special measures. Do you think it's about time that, I mean, can we trust the operations of our local councils by and large? Do you think it's about time that councils needed to have a massive audit? Because there's certainly been some stories where you find out about, for instance, particular transport costs running into the millions being contracted to just one firm, and it certainly makes one raise an eyebrow and wonder if there's been some sort of, you know, under-the-table deal going on.
Well, some councils are very, very effective, and I'm actually going to say Conservative councils, the evidence shows, are more effective at repairing roads, filling potholes, collecting your rubbish, stopping fly tipping, and keeping council tax bills low. But some are, I say, are badly run. I mean, it's not just your councils either, it's your mayors. You've got the mayor of West Midlands, whose number one priority is the Gaza conflict. I mean, just stick to your day job. And I say Bradford, who's, despite their financial pressures, has spent £30 million on some fountains in the city centre. It's simply wrong. These councils have to do better, and I urge anybody, if you're getting poor service from your council, vote it out.
A cultural city of the year or something, Bradford, isn't it? No wonder they needed that fountain. But what about the salaries at local council level? Because there are some people working in local authorities who are on salaries bigger than the Prime Minister. I mean, that is not sustainable, is it?
Well, I think we've all got a responsibility to make sure our books balance, and that goes for chief executives of local authorities. I mean, it's right you pay the right level of salary for a good person, but there's clearly some people in certain roles in certain councils around the country earning a lot of money and don't deserve it. I know today, actually, the chief executive of this new GB Energy, and nobody knows what it does, but we know that the chief exec is going to earn £550,000 a year and only has to work in the office 3 days a week. It's simply wrong. You've got to make sure that public money, taxpayers' money, is spent wisely.
Well, no wonder he's got a heat pump at home, no doubt, so he's saving us that little bit extra of a carbon emission from working from home. Now, let's talk now about bin collections, because it gets everyone hot under the collar. Particularly we're seeing in Birmingham, bin collections now massively postponed, rubbish piling up in the street, rats as big as cats apparently infesting neighbourhoods. This is a public health crisis when bins aren't collected. It's not just unsightly, this is downright dangerous.
Totally. You know, and you know, I'm waiting for the government to step in and sort the unions out in Birmingham, because the unions are causing this problem. There's about a dozen workers that are in dispute with their council, and because Birmingham is trying to restructure its workforce because it's got these financial pressures, some of which are self-inflicted, and of course the unions are fighting back and causing this, taking us back to the 1970s with these horrendous scenes around Birmingham, and of course, the connected health problems with that, rats and birds and all kinds of things. So I feel for the residents of Birmingham that Birmingham has to do better, the council has to do better, and the government needs to help sort out the strike. And of course, they are so close to the unions, I doubt very much whether they're going to step in and be firm with the unions. They never have been so far in their short, disastrous term in office. I
mentioned earlier, actually, that it seemed to be Labour's approach when they first came into power to devolve more and more competences down to local authorities, including, as you mentioned, adult social care. Of course, we've also got the huge impact of local authorities having to house migrants. People have broken into the country illegally. Do you think that is right? Do you think there should be more power devolved down to local areas, or do you think actually these should remain in Whitehall because clearly councils aren't able to cope with them?
Well, I think there's some very good councils around the country who do a good job and are close to the ground and can do things effectively. Not all councils are like that, and people need to look at that very carefully. My view is don't vote blindly when you're going to vote on May the 1st. Vote according to who you think is going to provide the best services. Don't make it a protest vote either. You've got protest parties right now. Don't be tempted. Vote for councillors who you know are local, who are going to work hard, have worked hard in the past, are going to work hard in the future, because some very good councillors out there.
Saying that, you're saying that, you know, you would obviously advocate that Conservative councillors are the best of the bunch, but a lot of your councillors have decided not to have elections. That's not right, is it? That's just avoiding the pain of potentially not winning seats.
That's a misreading what's going on. The government, which had no mandate for it, wasn't in the manifesto, has decided to scrap all two-tier councils in the country, all counties and all districts. So, and they're forcing them to do that.
But they gave the councils the opportunity to whether or not they wanted to have elections, and unsurprisingly, many Conservative councils said no, they'd rather not because they're worried about losing seats.
That's rubbish. They're worried about spending taxpayers' money. What's the point in having election this year and having another one next year? You care about public money. I care about public money because it's not yours or mine.
The time frame isn't that next year there'd be new elections, is it? That's not the time frame we're looking at. The time frame isn't that there'd be new elections again next year.
So, I mean, the government. The reality is the government has put a gun to the head of these councillors and these council leaders. What do they do then? Do they simply say not playing ball and have it all imposed upon them, or do they try and make the best of it on behalf of local residents? That's the invidious choice that these council leaders have and these councillors have. I don't blame them for deciding to do what's right for their local residents. We think it's totally wrong the government's doing this right across the country. Never been done before, certainly in my political lifetime. So, and they're giving councils no choice. At the same time,
they did give the councils a choice whether or not they would have local elections.
Well, I mean,
I think it's very convenient to say, look, we don't particularly want to have elections. Most people who are voted into a position, if they could choose not to face election, probably would choose not to face election, particularly when their polling is as bad as your party's polling is at the moment.
Yeah, that's just rubbish. You're choosing to be hung or to be shot. That's your choice they've been given. And the reality is, if you look at what's happened since the general election, we have won 59 seats over the last 10 months since the general election, and that's 5 times as many as any other party. We're not afraid of local elections. We won last night in elections. We won the night before in Three Rivers and up in Harborough. Good successes against all comers, and we've had some magnificent results where we get good councillors who are out there working hard with good activists. We win those seats. We're not afraid of any other party. Bring it on.
What's happened to levelling up? Because, of course, this was a big sort of, central policy of the Boris Johnson government. It was huge promises that there's going to be mass levelling up around the country. The Department of Levelling Up was created. I mean, where's that all gone? What are the Conservatives saying about levelling up now? You're the levelling up minister. What would Shadow Minister? What are the Conservatives promising they would do?
Well, as you can imagine, as a proud northerner, I'm very keen to make sure we continue with levelling up. It is the right ambition. I think one thing we got wrong with that, if we're looking back, is we weren't clear with people that the North, the Midlands, the Southwest, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland have all been underinvested in for decades. We should be clear with people that to level up properly, it's going to take decades to reverse those problems. But we can do that. We should do that. We spend an awful lot more on infrastructure. That's what we did in the last Parliament. We changed the rules on where the money's spent to make sure more is spent in the regions. So it doesn't all get spent in London and the South East. So we're doing the right things. We just need to be honest with people. It's going to take 20 to 30 years to properly level up this country. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue that objective. And that's certainly why I've kept it in my title. So I'm still the Shadow Secretary of State for levelling up. And Angela Rayner has removed it from her title. Clearly, she doesn't believe it's the right thing to do. I do.
Kevin Hollinrake, MP, Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, if you didn't guess that. Thank you ever so much for coming on the programme. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but when I come back, we're going to be updating you on travel chaos. Heathrow is closed until at least midnight tonight after a big old fire in a nearby electrical substation, basically cutting off power to one of the world's busiest airports. As you can imagine, it has had a hugely disruptive effect. We're going to give you all the latest details after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back to the programme. Right, if you're planning to fly somewhere today, you might want to check the conditions of that flight, especially if it's from Heathrow, because I can tell you right now it will have been cancelled because there's been a huge fire at a nearby electrical substation, which has caused a significant power outage, which means that Heathrow Airport is, as I understand it, closed until midnight tonight. Let's get the latest from Lisa Minnow, travel editor at The Sun. Hello, Lisa. I mean, they're saying this is unprecedented for the whole of Heathrow Airport, one of the world's busiest airports, to be entirely closed for, as we understand, at least a day. What's the latest?
Well, that's exactly that. There is no notification so far that things are going to change from that. It is up until midnight tonight that the airport will be closed. Now, that's impacting about 1,350 flights that were due to take off or land at Heathrow in that time. That's 291,000 passengers who are not where they need to be right now. So it's a really chaotic situation out there.
What is happening to those flights? I mean, you can look on wonderful things like Flight Map, where it sort of shows this huge cluster of aeroplanes in the sky and a big hole around Heathrow where they should be probably heading to. Are most people being directed to other regional airports around the UK? People are being sent to Europe?
Well, the lucky ones have landed at a UK airport because they've obviously got options then to go by rail or road back down into London. So the likes of Birmingham, Manchester, Gatwick, they've all been taking flights. But actually others all across Europe have. So we've had people landing in Amsterdam, in Frankfurt, in Iceland, quite a lot landing in Dublin as well and in Shannon Airport. So, I mean, there really is, planes scattered all over. The likes of Ryanair and EasyJet have both announced that they're putting on extra flights to help get people back to their destination. Obviously, Ryanair, and you do sometimes think that the prices of those flights, there's a little bit of exploitation, I would say, going on to a degree, but it will give people an opportunity to get home. Obviously, the airlines aren't due to give you any compensation because of your flight being cancelled, but they do have a duty of care to get you home as quickly as possible or get you to your destination as quickly as possible. They should be looking after you in terms of food and drink, and they should also be giving you a hotel if you have to stay overnight. So the airports, the airlines don't have any duty to give passengers compensation if their flights have been cancelled? No, because it's out of their control. So if there was a problem that the airline itself had and it was their fault, then there's compensation due. But in this situation, this is an extraordinary circumstance out of the airline's control. So therefore, they have a duty of care to look after you, get you to your destination, but no compensation is due. How is this impacting on other travel infrastructure? Because one imagines if people can't land at Heathrow and they're landing at other airports and then getting on trains and coach services, there'll be a knock-on effect for other transport networks. There very much will be. There's no trains at all into Heathrow at the moment, so that obviously is going to impact anyone who might have used those trains on a regular basis anyway. But no trains into Heathrow at all, and things are very busy at our other airports. It's not like our airports were sort of, loads of availability at the best of times. Gatwick, again, very busy. So it's been a real challenge for airlines to try to find places where they can land their planes. In some situations, planes have literally just turned around and gone back to the place where they departed from because it was easier than trying to find somewhere for them to land. It's going to take at least into the weekend, maybe into next week, before we have really the situation returning back to normal, because you've got planes in the wrong place, you've got crew going out of hours. It's going to take a significant amount of time. And I think if you look talking about the last time that we had something this big, I would say it probably would be like the ash cloud back in 2010 when airspace was closed for 5 days, and that impacted the whole of Europe. With Heathrow being as important as it is, as busy and big as it is, that's going to have similar kind of impact. Do we have any idea of the latest on when the airport will reopen? We had heard previously that they were looking to hopefully have things back up and running by midnight. Is that still the case? Well, that's what they've said. So they said the airport will remain closed until midnight. Interesting, though, the likes of Virgin Atlantic are saying that people should look and follow their updates, and that they hope to have the airport reopened or be accepting people onto Virgin Atlantic flights from about 6 o'clock this afternoon. They are saying that changes. It could change. So there is a disparity at the moment between airlines saying possibly they'll be taking passengers or accepting passengers from 6 o'clock, and Heathrow itself, which is saying do not come to the airport. right up until midnight. So it's a pretty chaotic situation.
This might be slightly beyond your area of expertise, but do we have any idea what's actually gone on here? Because it seems quite unprecedented for there to be such a big fire at an electricity substation that caters for one of the world's busiest airports.
Yeah, and I'm sure there'll be many questions asked in the coming weeks. As far as we know, this is an accident, a catastrophic accident is the way it's been described. And I think it was made worse by the fact that the substation and the emergency backup generators both were impacted by this, both were severely destroyed. And that's what's caused the real problems, is the fact that the backup generators failed as well. But I think there will be questions in the coming weeks and months as to how such a critical piece of infrastructure like Heathrow Airport can be so badly impacted by something like this. And perhaps then things will change and these places will be far more protected.
Have you got any advice for anybody thinking of travelling by any means, actually, over the coming weekend? As we were discussing, it's likely that other forms of transport could be impacted.
Well, I think you're going to have lots of patience if you are one of those impacted travellers. It could mean that you would have to be sort of forking out for yourself and then claiming money back from your airline if you have to book further flights or hotels or buy food and drink. Patience is going to be required, and research as well. So making sure you're totally up to date with your airline, they've got all of your correct contact details, and keeping on top of looking at their websites and on the likes of X, just to double check that you're as up to date as possible with the latest information.
Lisa Minnow, thank you ever so much for giving us the latest there from travel hell. It looks like hell, that's for sure. Massive inferno at that electrical substation near Heathrow Airport. I think that fire is now under control. Lisa's saying that she has heard that it seems like a catastrophic accident, but it's taken out the substation, it seems, and other connected backup generators. The world's busiest airport brought to a standstill. No flights in, no flights out, that having a catastrophic effect on travel. Let us know if this is you. Were you flying somewhere? Were you planning to fly somewhere? Do you have a relative or a friend now stranded? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call, and let us know your story if indeed this is you. We'd love to hear from actual passengers who've been delayed or don't know what's going on when it comes to their travel. You can WhatsApp me on that number as well, 0344 499 1000. You can also leave me a voice note on WhatsApp should you so wish. I do like those. You can give me a call, a text 87222. Write the word talk before your message. We're on X at talkTV. I'm going to take a short break now, but when I come back, we're going to be discussing all things politics with the ever wonderful Brendan O'Neill. Back after this.
Across the UK on DAB+. On your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back to the show. It's 10:31 and 54 seconds on Friday. Right, I'm joined now by Brendan O'Neill, Chief Political Writer at Spiked Online. Brendan, it's always good having you on the show, the voice of common sense. Now, let's first of all talk about this particular story, because it's sort of like, when it comes to our tribe, is being caught between two particular sort of ideologies here. A man who works for the Home Office was sacked for sharing a post paid by Richard Tice, a former UK MP. Gary Costin, he spent 15 years working for government contractors Mighty and G4S, was dismissed after a complaint about the message. Now, this was after Richard Tice had raised concerns about a Muslim lobbying group. The tweet basically said that the Home Office has a lobbying group to create a sort of Islam union within the Home Office, and Richard Tice said, uh-oh, and Richard Tice wrote, shocking revelations. Large Islamic network inside Home Office, now suspended, appears to have been deliberately undermining government policy. Now, Mr Costin, his job was to remove some of the most violent foreign-born criminals from the UK, had essentially shared this within a private WhatsApp group. Somebody had dobbed him in, and he's lost his job. So, I mean, what do you make of all of this? First of all, it seems crazy that someone should lose their job for private WhatsApp text, but it does equally show that there are people inside the Home Office who are pretty politicised.
Every part of this story is outrageous. Firstly, the fact that you can be punished for sharing the views of someone in a mainstream party. Reform is a mainstream party. They did very well at the last election. They got lots of votes. Lots of people support them. People should be allowed to support a party in a democracy that, like Britain, is supposed to be. That's the first outrageous thing. Secondly, the fact that he was dobbed in, as you say, for something that he wrote in a private WhatsApp group. I mean, that's thought policing. If you're policing people for what they are saying in private, that's like 1984, when everyone had a telescreen in their house to make sure that they weren't saying things privately that the government wouldn't like. So we're now making George Orwell's 1984 a reality in this country. And then, as you say, this is the Home Office. The Home Office is supposed to take charge of thinking seriously about problematic people who are coming to this country or people who might be trying to undermine this country. It's supposed to be open and serious about tackling those problems, and yet this guy was punished for expressing a certain view. Every part of this story suggests that Britain is really losing the plot.
Are we losing the plot to sort of stick with our commitments to nuclear weapons? This comes after John Healey, the Defence Secretary, said he took Vladimir Putin's threats to use his nuclear arsenal seriously. And the UK should not fight shy of the fact it has such weapons. I mean, are you in the business of saying, actually, they're a vital deterrent, or should we be actually moving towards disarmament because it could be seen as provocative?
No, I think we should keep our nuclear weapons. I think in a world in which nuclear weapons exist, and they do, many countries have them, we should keep ours. They are a useful deterrent, I think. They also create work. People work in this industry. They work in the upkeep of nuclear weapons, the testing of them, the creation of them, etc. I think they're probably a good thing for Britain. But, you know, when I hear someone like Healey saying we will not be scared to use our nuclear weaponry if push comes to shove, you know, I'm glad that our government is standing up to Putin, standing up to Russia and saying, listen, you can't just boss our allies around, you can't just boss us around. But the problem in this country is that the government talks a good fight, but we've decommissioned all the values and virtues that would actually make us a good fighting country. You're not supposed to be patriotic anymore. You're not supposed to be a have-a-go hero. You're not supposed to be a supposedly toxic young man. You're not supposed to be strong. You're supposed to celebrate your weakness and your fragility. All the things that would make us actually a real beater on the world stage, someone that people would really be scared of, we've put all that out to pasture. So it's fine for the government to say, look, we've got big weapons, but the truth is we've put out to pasture all the values and virtues and young people who might actually be able to fight for this country in the future.
Are you sort of suggesting that Labour may be rather cynically using the ongoing situation in Ukraine for reputational purposes, perhaps? Because, like you said, Keir Starmer seems to be talking tough when it comes to we're going to send boots on the ground. We learned today as well that the RAF are in talks to potentially have security flights over Ukraine. He seems to be talking up a good game, but like you said, is our infrastructure really there to enable us to actually stand tall on the world stage?
It really isn't, sadly. You know, I'm on the side of Ukraine. I think Russia's invasion of Ukraine was an act of criminal aggression. I think Ukraine deserves our support. But, you know, Keir Starmer is getting a real Ukraine boost. And you can see that because his polling has gone up a little bit and he's, you know, waltzing around the world saying, I'm going to save Europe and all this kind of stuff. The truth of the matter is that Keir Starmer can't even protect Britain's borders, never mind Ukraine's. This is a government that doesn't even know how to look after this country, never mind fighting for another country. And you will remember, Alex, a few years ago when the British Army advertised for snowflakes. I mean, they literally put out recruitment posters which said, if you're a snowflake, we want you, because they want your emotional intelligence and your sense of fairness, etc. So we've got a fighting force in this country that has gone very politically correct, that celebrates snowflakery, which actually looks down its nose at toxic masculinity. And by the way, we wouldn't have won any war in history without so-called toxic masculinity. So I just think that Keir Starmer talks a good fight, but the truth of the matter is that he can't control our borders. He doesn't know what to do with our military. He looks down his nose at white working class men who still make up the majority of our armed forces. So it just doesn't stack up, I'm afraid, when he talks like that and then behaves in a different way.
I'm glad you came on to this subject. I wasn't going to talk to you about this today, but hey-ho, you've opened up the Pandora's box of thoughts in my brain. And talking about toxic masculinity, I was actually on Newsnight last night, and it was one of the main topics on there, and as you can imagine, there's lots of it's nice for men to cry, and they had interviews of people going, you know, isn't it lovely, and men should be kinder, and then suicide rates among men. But I agree with you. I mean, I think men are being sold a pup, and I want to ask you about all the hubbub around this series on Netflix, Adolescence, and it sort of engendered this whole conversation again about, oh, look, the white working class boys, they're being brainwashed by Andrew Tate. And yet you won't find the same conversation when it comes to relationships between young men and women, talking about the impact of cultures from outside of our own country. What do you make of all the sort of furore around Adolescence? Have you watched it, and do you think it's being overhyped?
Yeah, I'm watching it and I'm writing about it for next week, and I'm not particularly enjoying it, but I'm really not enjoying the discussion around it. And, you know, it has led to this discussion about the problem of toxic masculinity and the way in which people like Andrew Tate exploit young men and warp their minds and turn them into monsters. Look, I'm not an Andrew Tate fan. I don't like him. I don't like what he says about women. I don't think that's a good role model for young men. But the truth of the matter is that we live in a country where virtually every institution for the past 10 or 20 years has been devoted to...
Oh, we seem to have lost Brendan there. I wanted to know what every institution's been devoted to. I would imagine he's about to say, I'm going to fill in the gaps and let's see if I'm correct, devoted to basically running down all elements of masculinity, the patriarchy, patriotism, all of those things. And, you know, it did really rankle me that, you know, once again, we've got something else coming out, pointing the finger, aren't men terrible? Haven't they got these horrible attitudes towards women? Well, yeah, I think these things do exist in society. We need to have a proper conversation about the impact of hypersexualization and pornography, quite frankly, which is sort of on steroids now in the 21st century. And yet, what you won't find if you rifle through the content on Netflix or rifle through the documentaries being made by legacy media is any sort of report into the toxic attitude of men towards women, which are basically hailing from countries where they have toxic attitudes when it comes to women. That subject will not be touched. And so yet again, what do we see? The finger of blame pointed solely at a young, white, working class kid. It's you. You are typecast to be the villain of the piece. And again, it's sort of the whole conversation about, well, you know, should men be more empathetic? Should they be kinder? What we seem to be lacking, and let me know what you think about this, right? My view is this. What we seem to be lacking in the 21st century is a message that actually being a husband and being a father is deeply rewarding, okay? That might seem tedious. It's not flashy sports cars. It's not, you know, posing on balconies in Dubai holding a magnum of champagne. It might be changing nappies. It might be doing the school run. It might be teaching your kids how to play throw and catch. But actually, that is rewarding. The nuclear family, being a good husband, being a good father, looking after your cubs, gives men so much reward. The statistics show that when men are single throughout life, they usually have a shorter life expectancy. They're not particularly happy. The family unit is so important. I wish that was the message being given rather than this constant throwing of an instant gratification. I'm pleased to say, for your instant gratification, we've got Brendan O'Neill back via the telephone, though, this time. Brendan, we lost you sort of mid-flow there. You were saying institutions in the country have been bombarded by, and then we had this sort of suspenseful ellipsis.
Yeah, sorry about that. There's been a blackout here, so maybe if we had more toxic masculine young men working on the electricity, it wouldn't go out so much.
Are you near Heathrow by any chance?
Yes, I am.
Oh.
So I think it's related to that. I think it is. Yeah, I think, you know, we live in a country where masculinity has become a dirty word. And in schools, in colleges, amongst the political class, and certainly in popular culture, masculinity is now always preceded by the word toxic. It's seen as a bad thing to be a strong, confident young man. You're supposed to be emoting and crying and weak and confessing to your fragility, etc., etc. I think any society that does that it's basically committing suicide, because a society without strong men is in big trouble. And the truth of the matter is that when crisis arises, it is often the men of the working class who protect us from barbarism, who protect us from disaster. We saw that with the LA fires a few months ago, where it was brave, young, strong men who were out on the street putting out those fires and saving that city. So, you know, we really do live in an anti-masculine, anti-man society. And for politicians to now turn around and say there's a problem with men and boys, yes, there is, and you caused it.
Let's talk about masculinity. I'm going to relate this to the ding-dong that's recently happened in Reform UK. There might be some people thinking, what's going on there? Is this not sort of two alpha males locking horns? It's like two stags rutting. Is there an argument to say, actually, that, you know, when we define masculinity, that it does come with its problems?
Everything comes with problems, but I think the benefits, when it comes to encouraging young boys to become confident, strong men, the benefits far outweigh the downsides. And those benefits are that these men will likely be more willing to take responsibility for their families, to play a productive role in society, to feel confident enough to do those things. At the moment, what we're doing, we're telling boys, look, you're going to grow up to be a monster. You're going to be this toxic person called a man. You're probably going to abuse women. You're going to be really horrible. I mean, that's the message they get all the time. And what it leads to is a culture of almost self-negation. They kind of negate their own male instincts and their desire to grow up to be confident, strong men. So, and we lose out. As a society, we lose out. Of course, there are always going to be downsides to having loads of young men walking around the streets. You know, they'll get into fights, they'll go into scraps, they'll lock horns like Farage and Lowe do. But the truth is that without that presence in society, we're in big trouble. And I think politicians are finally realizing that, but their solution to it is even worse, because they're now saying, you've got to watch adolescents, you've got to realize that Andrew Tate's the most evil person in the world, and men should cry morning, noon and night. That's disastrous.
I couldn't agree more. I like a good man. Let man be manly. Brendan O'Neill there, editor of Spiked Online. Thank you ever so much for joining us. Right, we're going to take a short break now. When we come back, it's the opportunity for you to throw in your 2 bits. I've got lots of messages here. I want to also take some calls from you. So if you're thinking of joining the conversation, let it be now. 03444 99 1000 is the number to dial. It's your standard network rate. You're not going to be held on the phone and charged a gazillion pounds. Oh no, it's basically free. You can register your interest in speaking to me in the studio, and the gorgeous and glamorous Shalopay will pick up your call. And if you're deemed good enough by her, you will be patched through to the studio, and I hope that is you. 8722 is the number to text. Remember to write the word talk before you send your message. We're on X at talkTV, and I'm back after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, good morning to you, and good morning if you're in Birmingham and you're having to live within a sort of infested swamp of litter, takeaway boxes, rats the size of cats. It's terrible, isn't it? The binnies have gone on strike, and I mean, it's a public health crisis. Lots of people messaging in about that. Amanda says this is a major health crisis. She says, why has no one asked about bringing in the army to clear the mountains of rubbish? Just wondering if the residents of Birmingham could withhold paying their rates, or in fact take them to court for breach of contract. That's Barry from Morecambe saying that. And someone else has said, yes, we've had a 5.9% increase in council tax. Now just had an increase of water services to 33%. As usual, the people are being hammered more and more and don't understand why this useless government does not stop any kind of immigration first and then work from there if further tax is needed. Why do I feel this increase is on us to pay for the illegals? Do you know, I had a right old thing the other day. I'm just dealing with HMRC at the moment, and no one likes dealing with HMRC. And it's all about tax and this and that, and having to update my end of year accounts. And I just thought, do you know what? I pay the highest rate of tax. Oh, higher than high, because I'm under IR35, which means I'm paying everyone's tax. Mine, theirs, the government's. And I don't take anything from the state. I really don't. I make the impact of me on what the government spends is practically zero. I pay a huge amount of council tax, a huge amount of income tax, and all the rest of it. And I don't have kids in school. I barely use the NHS. I've got private medical insurance, because who can use the NHS in this day and age? And what do I get in return? I tell you what I get in return for the vast amount of money I spend as a freelancer, meaning that I'm 41 and still battling to get on the housing ladder. I'm putting people in houses who have come from Somalia. That's what I'm doing. I'm making sure that people who arrived in the country yesterday on a boat get put up in 4-star hotels. I'm making sure that 51% of people in this country are living off taxes rather than paying taxes, that are net beneficiaries, not net contributors. I'm making sure, frankly, that people who don't want to go to work because they're anxious or depressed or want to watch the latest Netflix series get to do just that. I don't get to do that. When I don't work, I don't get paid. And I'm kind of sick to the back teeth about all of it. I don't know if that's you as well. And I do feel for the people in Birmingham who are paying a load of council tax and finding that they're surrounded by a swamp of nightmares. Imagine opening your door and looking out onto a sea of bobbing black bags and rats and foxes and dirty nappies and takeaway boxes and the smell and the flies, and it's soon enough going to be hot enough that the wasps all come as well. I mean, poor blimmin' people. And it does feel like that. It just feels like we're constantly hemorrhaging money. And for what? What are we getting in return? I think everyone's feeling that now. Yes, there's global inflation because Russia invaded Ukraine. Yes, we've been rubbish on our energy infrastructure for so long because nobody foresaw the fact that dependency on foreign gas and oil would probably cause some problems because most countries that control it are malevolent. Oh, that's right, we'll just turn off our own gas and oil. Yeah, that's okay. We'll rely on dodgy dictatorships from other countries to look after us when the lights go out. We're not going to do anything about our infrastructure. Oh, kaboom. Look, an electrical substation is blown up near Heathrow. Now the entire airport's shut down because there's no backup plan. It just makes you go spare. You find out then that this great British energy that Ed Miliband set up, £8.3 billion to set up GB Energy, is really on schedule to target. Absolutely, absolutely. It's so good. And it's going to create loads of jobs. It's not going to create loads of jobs. Even the Tony Blair Institute says it's not going to create loads of jobs, you moron. And he's giving his chief exec £525,000 a year to do a 3-day week. Well, don't you worry, because it turns out that during his 3 days that he was at work, Jurgen What's-his-chops, the person who runs Great British Energy, has come up with a brilliant plan. Wait for this, ladies and gentlemen. This is worth £500,000 a year. All right? He's got an £8.3 billion budget. He's got a £500,000 salary. And this is what he's going to do. 200 million. Yeah, it's a drop in the ocean from that massive budget. He's going to put solar panels on hospitals and schools. Couldn't they have done that themselves? I mean, it's great that they're now not going to have to pay for it and it's going to cut their energy bills. But is that all you've got? Is that it? Where are these coming from, these solar panels? Oh, that's right. That's why you keep going over to China, isn't it? To buy them from the Chinese, you big morons. Honestly, I just can't even... I can't get my head around any of it. Anyway, this is what Ed Miliband had to say earlier.
Great British Energy is your publicly owned energy company, and here's its first project, putting solar panels on the roofs of schools and hospitals in your community. That's what a publicly owned energy company can do for our country.
There you go. Yeah, Great British Energy, your money. We're going to make loads of jobs in China. I can't wait to give Xi Jinping all this money so we can self-flagellate at the altar of climate disaster. Brilliant. Well, Ed Miliband will probably be pleased to know that we're contributing less into the solar system when it comes to, carbons, because there's no flights coming out of Heathrow today because, of course, there is that huge fire at the electrical substation. And do you know what? When I came into the office this morning, they had a little bet on what I was going to say, right? I came in and I said, all right, convenient, isn't it? Electrical substation has suddenly caught fire and all the generators nearby taken out the whole of Heathrow. Is that accidental? And they went, oh, here she goes. Well, guess what? I've got some breaking news for you, ladies and gentlemen. Counter-terrorism police are now part of the investigation into Heathrow fire. The Times understands that they're just a few floors down from us. Brilliant newspaper. The Times understands detectives are being deployed because of their specific expertise and because of the need to quickly examine whether sabotage played a part. Now, I don't know. I'm glad it's being investigated. But what we do know about some of the enemies of this country is this is very much their playbook. This is exactly how they like to operate. Either we've got one of the most useless grids, in the world where it can just randomly catch on fire and take out all the generators, downing every single flight in the world's busiest airport. Either we're that useless or someone's gone along and thought, I know what's really going to mess up Britain and impact the economy and send a warning shot across the bows. Let's go and tack our critical infrastructure, which isn't even guarded. You can go on a map and find out where these things are. It's not like anyone's there going, oh, please don't, bust open a gas pipe. It's just, honestly, heaven forfend. Right. Let's go to the phone lines now and speak to Tracy, who's in Northampton. Hi, Tracy.
Oh, good morning. Do you know what? I've got to applaud you and I bow to you because you just said everything. You are brilliant.
Oh, thanks. Well, what was everything? I mean, I did sort of squeeze a lot into my rant. But
everything over so brilliantly of what this country is. And I applaud you for what you've just said.
Oh, thank you.
I want to talk about the council tax.
Yes.
When we were voting for who we wanted to go into, be our Prime Minister, we got promised all these promises by Labour. Loads and loads of promises. No, they wouldn't put anything on council tax. They wouldn't do this. They wouldn't do that. Wouldn't do that. Already he's done so much damage to this country. And now you hear today, or whenever it was, breaking news, that he is putting up council tax.
Right.
Right. Don't the Labour Party see what he's doing to our country? Don't they see that he's incapable of running our country? He's too busy running around with all the other different countries saying, we're going to sort you, we're going to sort you, and we're going to support you. What about our country?
Right. Yeah, exactly. What about us? I mean, thank goodness they actually did take a sort of brave step. Of course, all the sort of bleeding heart lefties in Labour are very upset about this, that they're going to cut foreign aid in order to increase defence. Why, when the country seems to be on its knees and we're told, well, it's because of malign people abroad invading other countries. That's the fault. Why are we then still paying money to people abroad, not going, hey, that's better off spent back at home? We're importing all of these crises, paying for them. You and I are paying for it. We're paying for all of these people from other countries who don't like their own rubbish countries to come here. But why? Why?
But what I can't understand is why the Labour government can't see that he's incapable and, you know, leaving the party and going over to another or putting in a
Yeah,
vote.
but you know, the thing is about this, Tracy, politicians in this day and age don't actually care about politics. They don't have an ideology. They don't care about this country. All they want to do is be elected, that they can swan about in the palaces of Westminster with their staff, so they can cut a few ribbons at the local fete, think they're the big I am in the local community, strut about pigeon-chested, thinking they're saving the world when they don't believe in anything and they won't stand up for anything. Tracy in Northampton, thank you ever so much. Right, taking a short break now. Don't go anywhere. 2 more hours of this to come. See you soon.
I can announce this government will begin the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War. We will deliver our commitment to spend 2.5% of GDP on defence, but we will bring it forward so we reach that level in 2027.
The answer from European capitals has been as resounding as it is clear. We are in an era of rearmament to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
On Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman. A great, great gentleman. He said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time, and he better not be right. Well, I just think he should be more appreciative, because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us, because, as you know, that's right there, that's the border.
What kind of diplomacy, JD, you are speaking about? What do you mean?
I'm talking about the kind of diplomacy that's going to end the destruction of your country.
Yes, but if you
Mr.
are
President,
not strong...
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there, welcome back to the show. Now, there has been an update on that massive fire at an electoral substation that provides all of the power to Heathrow. Not only did the substation seem to self-immolate, but the backup generators did as well. And you can't blame one for thinking that is all rather fishy. Well, it turns out I'm not the only one who seems to think so, because counter-terrorism police are now part of the investigation into the Heathrow fire. This is according to The Times, who understands detectives are being deployed because of specific expertise and the need to quickly examine whether sabotage took place. It's understood that this is a precautionary measure rather than indication of foul play. The Metropolitan Police has been contacted for comment. Even if sabotage is ruled out, there are major security questions that need to be answered. How can it be possible that a fire at a substation can take out one of the world's busiest airports. And you've got to think about this, OK? Think about the implications of this. Because one assumes when there is no power going to airports, this isn't just someone wheeling their suitcase past Pret-a-Manger and suddenly the lights on the fridges turn off. We're talking about air traffic control. We're talking about being able to communicate to planes in the sky flying around, making sure they don't crash into each other. We're talking about all the systems in the airport that are used to monitor passports, that we need to protect our borders. It's really quite risky, you know. So I do think there are serious questions that need to be answered about this, and we're going to try and start asking those questions and getting some answers throughout the course of the programme. And of course, we are going to be bringing you travel updates as well, because this is going to impact not just flights that are coming in and out of Heathrow today, but it's going to affect flights coming in and out of Heathrow for quite a long period of time, as the whole schedule has to be rejuggled to make sure people can get back at home. This is going to impact flights at other regional airlines and airports as people get redirected. This is going to potentially impact on motorways and train services as people have to find alternative sources of transport. We will be catching up with Simon Calder, who is, of course, travel guru, a bit later on in the show, and speaking to somebody as well about this latest development. The counter-terrorism police are now looking into the fire at the electrical substation that has caused all flights to be grounded at Heathrow Airport. Right, let's go back to having a good old rant and moan about the state of the nation, shall we? Because what we have found out is council tax is soaring. Now, Sir Keir Starmer said, no, council tax isn't going to go up under me. Well, it's very easy now for him to point the finger of blame and say, well, do you know what? It's up to local authorities, isn't it? And if they decide to put council tax up, that's nothing to do with central government. But he did also, during the King's speech, decide to devolve a load of extra competences to local authorities and say, right, you need to be in charge of all adult social care. Oh, guess what? You've also got to house these 200 randos who have come over on a boat, put them in a hotel, put them in some sort of properties you've got hanging about the place. And all the while, local councils are equally facing things such as increase in national insurance for employers' payments. You know, they're going to have to now pay extra for their binnies and their street sweepers and people who fill potholes. They're having to pay more in energy bills, water bills, just like the rest of us. So is it a surprise that most council tax bills are now set to soar by an inflation-busting 5% this year? The typical Band D cost in England is going to go up by £109. Of 384 authorities covered by the government's cap, so the government does say, OK, you can't go up more than this amount, set at 4.99%, apart from in a few dire circumstances. 293 are going to be imposing as much as they are allowed to impose. And yet, what are you getting for it? If you are a resident of Birmingham, what you're getting for it is the blight of unemptied bins, streets littered with funky, stinking, nasty rubbish, massive rats that look like they've been, I don't know, like blown up from that 1980s classic Honey, I Blew Up the Kids, you know, sniffing around doorsteps, chewing on old takeaway boxes, dirty nappies, disease. It's like some sort of horrible picture of Victorian Britain. Look at that. There are sofas chucked in there as well. There's always someone who has to chuck a sofa into the mix, isn't there? Right, let's speak now to Simeon Lee, who's a policy analyst at Taxpayers Alliance. Simeon, I kind of feel like never before has so little been done for so much when it comes to people paying council tax in this country.
I mean, you're absolutely right. This is a story we've seen take place time and time again. Council tax go up and the level of services go down. I mean, if you look at the numbers for this upcoming year, 9 in 10 councils are going to increase council tax by the maximum amount allowed. And if you look at the long-term trend of council tax, we see it's actually almost tripled since 2000. So if you ask people, are you getting 3 times the level of services? I think many people would disagree, and the people of Birmingham would certainly disagree.
Yeah, so what is actually going on here? Why are so many council taxes really facing so much strain? Is it about people being paid too much? Is there far too much money being paid on woke staff? Is it because actually just costs of living have gone up generally and that's impacting on local councils? Is it also, I mean, I understand that some councils have been hit so hard by this sort of gender pay order that was put out to make sure that women are paid as much as men, and huge backdated compensation really hitting local councils' budgets hard. What is at the root of all of this?
Well, I mean, in the case of Birmingham, it's a very, very clear case of incompetence and mismanagement. I mean, we recently had a commissioner's report into what's going on, and the findings were extremely stark. It put the blame squarely at the feet of the councils. I mean, if you look at what's happening in Birmingham, they've had a gender pay settlement of hundreds of millions of pounds, and on top of that, they've had failed implementation of a new IT system that's also going to cost hundreds of millions of pounds. So in many cases, it's incompetence at the level of councillors, but also we see councils speculating on property investments that haven't done well in the post-COVID era. And of course, in many cases, it's just overcomplicating something that should be very simple, bin collections. We recently had a piece of research come out that showed that people in this country are being forced to dig through rubbish, essentially to sort their waste into up to 10 different types of containers. And so these are clear reasons why the services have deteriorated. And of course, there's plenty of blame to go around at the national level as well. You mentioned earlier about how the government has raised the punishing tax on employers, national insurance tax, which is going to hit councils as well. It's the government passing the buck to councils and trying to claw back some of the money through higher national insurance rates.
But why don't heads roll when it comes to this? Because, you know, you always see people employed by local authorities on hugely inflated salaries. A lot of people being paid more than the Prime Minister. And yet they don't ever seem to be held accountable. When we find out that when audits are done and councils are put into special measures, and you find out that, you know, one local firm has got some sort of multi-million-pound contract to take one kid to school in a specially adapted vehicle, you think, where is the auditing? Why aren't people fired? Is there corruption going on at local council level, adding to the flagrant waste? I mean, why on earth are councils not being held more accountable? And even more still, not only are they not being held more accountable, a lot of them have decided not even to have elections in a couple of weeks' time.
Well, it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, far too little attention is being paid to what's going on at the council level. In fact, a lot of the services that we interact with day to day actually occurs at the council level. Bin collections is a major one. If you look at the state of bin collections, for example, we see about 42 councils across the UK are actually looking to reduce bin collections. So what's going on in Birmingham could soon be happening all across this country. If you look at Bristol Council, they're looking at reducing bin collections to as little as once a month. So if you can imagine that once a month, people are going to have their bins going.
Why are they going after bin collections? Because you think of all the things that they might want to cut when it comes to the nonsense that some local councils spend our cash money on. Bin collections is exactly the thing you don't want to cut, because what is clear, we live in highly densely populated urban areas. There are more people being crammed into our country than ever before. The population is absolutely swollen in recent years due to the uncontrolled levels of mass immigration. You have people who, I hate to say it, don't seem to have the same sort of social etiquette when it comes to disposal of waste in this country, because they might come from countries where just chucking something on the street is fair game. And then these councils turn around and go, oh, do you know what? Yeah, we might not bother collecting the rubbish only once a month. Why do that?
Well, in many cases, it's easier to just cut services than actually put in place some sort of reform at the council level. And there's also part of the reason is because of the environmental agenda. If you look at Wales, for example, the government in Wales are actually forcing local councils to split the rubbish up into different kinds of bins. So that's one major reason for that as well.
I mean, I don't know where to begin on this. Is there any mechanism in place where local authorities get audited, where someone do they have to go into special measures before someone peeks under the bonnet and says, right, lads, how are you spending the money? Is this all sensible? Because at the end of the day, it's our money. And like you said, most of the things we interact with on a daily basis, whether it's potholes in the street, whether it's local services, local schools, you know, whatever it may be, is usually administered at local authority or council level. And yet it seems to me no one ever goes in there and says, you know, what is going on? Is this money being spent effectively? Is there a system in place to make sure that these entities are audited?
Well, I think that when there's financial difficulties, when councils declare bankruptcy, the government will take a look at it. But there's insufficient mechanisms, certainly, to make sure that councils don't get to that point of bankruptcy before somebody actually has to step in. And of course, we at the Taxpayers Alliance have done a lot of work looking into local councils, looking into what exactly is going on at the local council level, and helping people sort of get informed about what's going on at the council level. Because at the end of the day, it's people who are going to have to pay these council taxes, and people who will have to hold local government to account through elections.
Oh, well, elections, a lot of them have been cancelled in May. Hurrah! Great for democracy. What sort of things have you found out? If you're going to give me sort of the headlines of Taxpayers Alliance research and some of the more ghoulish things you found out about local councils.
I mean, every year we do this big release called the Town Hall Rich List, where we look at the top highest remunerated people in councils, council executives. And of course, this year, we're going to have another release that's probably going to show a massive increase in the number of councillors receiving over £100,000. We have many, many people in these councils receiving more than the Prime Minister, if you can believe it, just in terms of their salary. And that's even before you add on the massive pensions.
Right, no, well, yeah, exactly. That's a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. Aren't you lucky if you're a public servant? I mean, actually now, our bloated public sector, 51% of people actually basically taking from taxes, not contributing to taxes. Fewer than half of us are working in the private sector and actually paying for this country to operate. Shimian Lee, policy analyst at the Taxpayers Alliance, thank you ever so much. Right, we've got a little update about this fire at the substation near Heathrow Airport, causing one of the world's busiest airports to close entirely. London Fire Brigade's Deputy Commissioner Jonathan Smith has been speaking. He said, as of the most recent updates that I have received, approximately 10% of the fire remains alight. Now, this hasn't just impacted on the airport, but 67,000 households left without power after the fire at the substation. 5,000 still without power. Other people losing power, apparently, while we're on air. We were speaking to Brendan O'Neill earlier via Zoom, and all of a sudden he disappeared because guess what? He was in the middle of a blackout. Smith confirms there remains no power in Heathrow Terminals 2 or 4. Right, we're going to be getting the latest on this after the break. We're going to be speaking to Alan Mendoza about the breaking news that counter-terrorism police are part of the investigation into this Heathrow fire, and catching up with travel guru Simon Calder on the latest updates. Don't go anywhere. I'm back after this.
£3.5 billion in public spending, infrastructure, public services, housing, healthcare, education, public transport, etc. So altogether, we have 1.2 million foreign nationals who are costing us in benefits and infrastructure investment £11 billion a year. Is that the idea of immigration?
Vladimir Putin has shown over and over again that he uses agreements, talks, to reposition himself, re-equip himself. So we've seen this before, and we've seen this with Ukraine. Assurances were made, agreements were signed between Russia and other countries about protecting the integrity, the independence and the sovereignty of Ukraine, particularly at the point when Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons arsenal.
There was a big round. I think the Tories gave judges the power to do.
So why they're not using it?
Well, some of them don't think it's. Some of them, some of them are, doing 10 cases a week. So there is definitely. I totally agree with you, especially for if you.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello there. Let's get some travel updates now, because as no doubt you will be aware, there has been a massive fire at an electrical substation, including the backup generators, which care for the power at Heathrow Airport, causing the entire airport to be closed today. Significant disruption emanating from that. Let's speak first to travel guru at The Independent, Simon Calder. Simon, what is the latest? I mean, this must be having a huge sort of reverberative impacts on the entire travel network.
Oh, it's just absolutely awful. I'm speaking to you, Alex, from Glasgow, and of course every single flight out of Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen and Inverness was cancelled today, along with another 1,300 or so other flights. It's difficult to overstate how bad this is. We've got Europe's busiest airport completely closed, over 1,300 flights, nearly 250,000 passengers due to fly in or out. And some of the passengers who were aboard flights that were actually in the air at 3 a.m. when the order came out, right, we're closing Heathrow, are now finding themselves strewn across Europe, from Reykjavik in Iceland and Shannon in the Irish Republic, right across to places like Lyon in France and Munich in Germany. So an absolute mess, and no sign yet about when things might improve.
What would your advice be to somebody who is now finding their flights cancelled or severely delayed? Is there any form of compensation they can get? Because speaking earlier to a travel correspondent, she was saying that actually, because this isn't the fault of the airlines, yes, they have to try and provide you with an alternative way of getting back home. Yes, they might have to give you food, water and even a hotel, but they don't have to pay you back.
That's exactly right, yeah. Look, I'm in the position of being like thousands of people. I'm at Glasgow. I've got a booking for a flight this afternoon. It's not going. So British Airways has to, in theory, find me a hotel for a night until it can get me where I need to be, or find me another way back, although I'll probably just hop on a train. And that is the strict duty of care is very separate from the compensation. Compensation only applies when the airline messes up and you're over 3 hours late or your flight's cancelled, and that runs into hundreds of pounds. But the duty of care and the compensation parts are completely separate, and it is absolutely, if anybody, any airline leaving from a UK airport says, oh, yeah, we don't need to do this because it wasn't our fault in terms of finding an alternative flight and providing hotels, that is completely wrong. There is, unfortunately, a kind of loophole which any non-European, non-UK airline flying from outside Europe into the UK, into Heathrow, can just turn around and say, the air passenger rights rules don't apply to us. So it's a real mess, I'm afraid.
And this is going to go on for quite some time. It's going to impact other airlines and other airports for a few days to come, one imagines.
Well, that is the big problem, Alex. Yeah, we are going to see, I'm afraid, that British Airways in particular, with pilots, planes, cabin crew strewn across Europe, that it's going to take them several days to get back on track. And that's assuming that Heathrow gets the lights back on at midnight tonight, as we hope. And then, yes, other knock-on effects are going to ripple through. Other airports are not affected at the moment, except to the extent that if you're Manchester, if you're Gatwick, if you're Glasgow, suddenly you've got a few thousand extra people arriving. And as a result of that, you found that there was simply no way of getting people quickly through, because, of course, they don't have the extra baggage handlers and UK Border Force and everybody else.
Simon, thank you ever so much for those updates. Everyone knows Simon Calder. He doesn't need much outro, does he? He is, of course, the travel guru at The Independent. Let's speak now to Dr. Alan Mendoza, Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. At this breaking news, which is that counter-terrorism police are now going to be part of the investigation into the fire at the substation that has caused Heathrow to be closed down. Now, Alan, my sort of gut instinct said to me when I came into the newsroom this morning, I said to my producer, look, do you think this could be foul play? Because what we do know about enemies of the state is that arson attacks, particularly on critical infrastructure, is part of their playbook. What's your gut feeling about this?
Yes, I mean, look, it has to be investigated. It's an obvious path for any state actor, state-inspired actor who wants to cause trouble to go after critical infrastructure like this. So it's very much within the purview of the sorts of conversations we've been hearing about from MI5 in the past year about, sort of Russian agents and others potentially causing chaos in the UK. It doesn't mean, of course, this is an attack from abroad, but the possibility needs to be discounted and needs to be discounted quickly to discover exactly what has gone on here. Whether it is or isn't, it is a critical national infrastructure fail. It's a fail because you can't have Heathrow shut down for a day. There should be numerous ways that's avoided. For that not to be avoided tells you that we have A, a security problem potentially, but B, an infrastructure problem that needs to be resolved quickly, and we need a full national audit. Hopefully there is no terrorism of any kind involved, and it is purely a sort of a fire, as was stated. But even in that case, this is not good news for the UK.
Yeah, I mean, do we need to be asking a question about why our critical infrastructure isn't defended? As you said, we don't know what's gone on here regarding this particular electrical substation. To me, it's strange that not only is the substation being taken out, but all the backup generators as well seem to have not worked, or something's happened to them too. I don't know how they're laid out. I don't know whether it's all part of the same inferno that's engulfed the lot of it. But it does raise a question that even if this isn't a malign attack, it potentially could have been. Do we need to be looking into how we should better protect our infrastructure?
Absolutely. There's clearly got to be a hardening of our national infrastructure. We've argued for this for a long time, to say that there needs to be this full audit of those critical things that if they start going down, the country is in real trouble. And obviously, an airport is one of those areas that you want to have fully defended. So yes, clearly, if it can go down this quickly, whether it is by an attack or whether it is by a natural or unnatural occurrence, but one that has called not a terrorist setup, either way, you've got a situation where the UK has been left undefended as a result of that. And clearly, we have to take lessons from this and make sure that hardening occurs so that things like this can't happen again. And if one thing is knocked out, that doesn't mean that every other fail-safe system is also knocked out with it. It stands to reason that you need to have different sources, as it were, of power to make sure that you're not all caught out in one attack.
Yeah, I mean, this could be just a horrific accident that has taken place at this substation. It could be a malign actor. But let's talk about arson attacks that have taken place in the UK at the hands of foreign actors. I know of, was it a DHL cargo ship with all these exploding devices on? We also know that weapons manufacturers have been targeted by arson attacks believed to be conducted by Russian agents. I mean, what sort of things have been taking place in the UK that have been underreported?
Well, you've highlighted that. There was a whole spate of these sorts of activities. And I think MI5 were quite open, in their sort of hint, saying, look, there are problems here. We've got GRU agents roaming Britain's streets. We've got spy rings. We have other forms of espionage going on. We've got the potential for disruption on Britain's streets. And I think what it points to is the need to resource our intelligence services to the hilt to make sure we know what's going on in the UK, and to make sure, again, that there are not these opportunities for those agents working for foreign powers to cause the kinds of disruptions that we've seen. Now, it's one thing if it's low level, you don't want it, but it's not going to, knock out an entire, grid or a setup in that way. But when we're talking about the critical national infrastructure parts, imagine if a nuclear power plant was attacked, for example. I mean, there can be some truly horrendous consequences. So we need to have a proper handle, like I said, on what our infrastructure defence requirements are, and we need to make sure that we are set up to defend them.
I mean, I read a fascinating report by a modern war professor at King's College London into the possibility of sort of mass civil unrest in the UK, Dr. David Betts. And as part of his study, he talked about the fact that critical infrastructure wasn't defended and raised the possibility of if somebody did really want to create havoc in the UK, that actually if you did cause things like blackouts where all of a sudden you've got rotting food on supermarket shelves, you've got, people not able to function inside their own homes, that it can lead to mass unrest.
Well, indeed, the nightmare has always been what's known as an EMP attack, basically, electromagnetic pulse attack, which is normally conducted in this sort of context by detonating a nuclear weapon in the atmosphere above the target. So it's not a detonation on the ground. You're not actually trying to kill people with the direct detonation. But what you are doing is knocking out all the electrics, basically. And the scenario you've just discussed is indeed what would happen with an EMP attack. And that is why, these things figure quite high on the concerns of domestic agencies, because they will be truly catastrophic. If you don't have a hardening again of your electrical infrastructure against things like that, you can get mass blackouts, you can get water failing, no distribution. Think about the cities. Within 3 days, the cities basically become uninhabitable, and that is obviously a disaster. So this sort of thing, let's hope that he's only a fire. Let's hope that he's therefore a wake-up call to the government and to others to look at what's going on. But it does open up a whole range of scenarios that we would not want happening. Yeah, it's interesting, actually, because it actually coincides with these ongoing discussions about potential ceasefire in Ukraine, that Russia getting close to agreeing to a ceasefire on critical infrastructure. And it does make me think that when we talk about grey zone warfare in your line of work, we talk about these acts of war, which aren't necessarily dropping bombs on buildings or missiles on office blocks. It is about causing mass disruption like this. Yep, and Russia is the prime agent of chaos in this particular regard. They have been at this for decades, basically, planning this sort of thing for decades. And there's obviously considerable evidence that they have been engaged in at least low-level such activity in the UK in recent years. So the problem is that we know that Russia has been able to infiltrate the UK. We know the potential for disruption. So now, if we know all those things, and like I said, hopefully there is just an innocent fire, this is the wake-up call for government to take it seriously, to say what is happening with our critical national infrastructure, how do we harden it to make sure that neither accidents nor intentional damage can occur in the future. Dr. Alan Mendoza, it's always fantastic catching up with you. An EMP attack, I didn't know much about that. I'm going to go down a wormhole online about that one when I get home. I bet you I do. Imagine what a nuclear weapon detonated in the sky that sort of takes out our grids. I mean, that's the stuff of nightmares, isn't it? Now, on the subject of Russia, that is going to be the conversation we are having after the break, after Defence Secretary Healey has warned Russia that Britain's not going to shy away from their nuclear weapons. Is this poking the bear in the zoo? Is this talking tough? Can we back that up? Meanwhile, President Macron seems to be going a little bit away from Starmer's "we're going to put boots in the ground, we're going to have a European mission to peacekeep in Ukraine," saying, do you know what, lads, I'm going to go and speak to the UN. I'd rather they did it. We're going to be talking about all of that after this break. Don't go anywhere.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Now, if like me, you're probably someone who misses the 90s. It was the peak of civilization, at least I seem to think so. The world was much better back then. And I tell you what, there was much better music. So time now to find out how you could be in the chance of winning a portal to years past by going to the gig of the decade, Oasis in Wembley.
How do you fancy winning tickets to the hottest gig of the century? Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to bag yourself a pair of tickets to Oasis at Wembley this summer. Plus, we're giving away a whopping 10 grand and putting you up for the weekend in a London hotel. All you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 and you're in the draw. Alternatively, you can enter by post. Once again, all you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 or you can enter by post. Good luck.
18 plus UK excluding Northern Ireland. Enter by text for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on the 7th of April 2025. Or post your name and number to Oasis Competition, PO Box 3190. Colchester CO2 8GP to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of April 2025. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion.
There you go. Good luck if you're entering that competition. Right, now let's focus our attention on matters geopolitical and catch up with Igor Novikov, who is former advisor to President Zelensky of Ukraine. Igor, it's fantastic to have you back on the programme. Get me up to speed with where you think these sort of negotiations over a potential ceasefire are going.
Well, it depends on where you're looking. If you're looking at what's going on the ground, it doesn't look like there are any negotiations happening, especially about critical infrastructure, because yesterday there was a massive attack yet again, and they have become a nightly occurrence in Ukraine. And Russia is not even pretending to target military targets. They are targeting civilians. They're targeting critical infrastructure. So if there's any ceasefire on the horizon, it's not felt in Ukraine just yet. In terms of the actual negotiations, well, President Trump's administration seems to be optimistic. So let's leave it up to them pretty much, because when it comes to Russia, I remain pessimistic even after anything is signed.
I mean, Putin has rather puffed up his chest and made plenty of demands when the ball was in his court and it came to, OK, would you accept a ceasefire? What are your conditions? He basically wants to keep everything that he's got so far. He wants a promise that Ukraine will never join NATO. He absolutely refutes the idea of having any sort of European boots on the ground. So it doesn't seem to me like he's up for negotiating at all. So what Trump had basically said is if you don't play ball, if you don't play nice, if you don't give a bit of ground, we're going to come after you in a big way. Do you think Trump's going to follow through on that? What would that mean?
Well, there are two potential scenarios right now. One is things keep going the way they're going, and at some point the White House either gets distracted, and Russia does have many friends, quote unquote, in the world to distract President Trump. We are talking about North Korea, Iran, and so on and so forth. And then he'll just look the other way or blame Ukraine once again for something. Or he could be serious about ending this war. If that's the case, my prediction is that sooner or later he will have to show strength to Russia, real strength, not what's been shown so far.
Is there a likelihood here that this is exactly what Putin is doing? He's trying to say to Europe, stay out of my business, stay out of my affairs, don't come sniffing around when we want to take back what we see as our territory in Ukraine. Because at the same time, you've had, of course, Sir Keir Starmer bragging about putting UK boots on the ground. Some might say rather prematurely before any sort of agreement took place between European leaders. It certainly seemed to upset the then German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, who stormed out of a meeting in a huff saying we won't be part of any such thing. Italy has said we won't be part of any such thing. France, meanwhile, seems to be taking a different tack and is saying that we want to go and speak to the UN to provide a peacekeeping force. How do you think that Ukraine can best be helped by Europe at this point?
Well, first of all, by Europe, actually, Ukraine could be helped by Europe showing some unity for once. That could be useful. Secondly, well, pardon me for my cynicism and pragmatism here, but whenever I hear the words the United Nations, that's the dead end. That means we can't do anything. Let's go and speak with the organization where if I'm not mistaken, either Russia or Iran were on the actual chairs of the Human Rights Council. So that's kind of the level of that organization. And do pardon me, but after 3 years of war, it's completely useless. And speaking to the UN could be a way to delay, or it could be just a way out of this situation. Well, we can't do anything without the UN kind of authority here, and the UN obviously will not vote against it because the Security Council does have Russia with its veto power.
Right, and America increasingly sort of seems to be backing Russia when it comes to votes on the UN Security Council. But what's gone wrong here? Because, from any outsider looking at this, is a blatant act of aggression. Russia lined up its tanks and its troops outside of Ukraine, stormed in, rather hoped it would take the capital Kiev and failed, has continued to, this war of attrition. To most people in the UK, it's quite evident who the person in the wrong is here. And yet, Ukraine isn't attracting the sort of support it needs from Europe. There isn't enough harmony among European leaders for various maybe domestic political reasons, economic reasons, reasons of where they get their gas, so on and so forth. But America isn't sort of looking at Ukraine going, well, this is terrible. Our old adversary Russia's invaded an innocent country. We must swoop in to help. Why? Why isn't Ukraine attracting that sort of support?
Well, let me explain it to you in layman's terms. Imagine you own a house and you have a neighbor, and your neighbor actually gets robbed by somebody you have business partnership with. And obviously, robbing somebody's house is wrong, and you need to call the police, you need to go and help. But at the same time, that means you'll lose your lucrative business partnership. And you kind of go, well, how about I get somebody else to call the police, and maybe I'll give up on some of the money I'm earning with that guy, but, I want to keep some of it, and, it's too soon, and I don't want to provoke the guy. Maybe he robs my house, and so on and so forth. It's a weak kind of approach, and unfortunately, it's led us to where we are right now. It all began, unfortunately, tragically, with President Obama doing nothing about the annexation of Crimea. Nothing. That's the precedent, the first precedent since the Second World War of, the international borders being redrawn by force. And he's done absolutely nothing. I think that was the beginning of the end of the United States as a world policeman. Now, it's still, kicking and fighting, but at the moment it looks like it might be a little too late. And the only question that I have is, what does China have to say about this?
Well, China always likes playing both sides, doesn't it? As long as they're bringing in the money and it's disrupting the West, I think China's having a field day. But what would you advise? You are a former advisor to President Zelensky, who has spent 3 years now essentially tirelessly canvassing, especially European leaders, saying, we need those weapons. We need your support. Stop doing business with Russia. And for various reasons, like those you've outlined, Europe has responded in a disharmonious cacophony of disagreement. Then, of course, a change of leadership in America, and Zelensky was invited to the White House, and rather than having the arm of support put around him by the leader of the free world, he got a significant dressing down. So where can he go from here? How should he be now reflecting on what's happened in recent months and trying to regain that support and actually sort of, potentially making Donald Trump wake up and say, actually, we feel sorry for you. You've done nothing wrong. We see a valuable partnership in you when it comes to rare earths, and we want to back you to the hilt.
Well, there are actually many options on the table. I mean, I think the mistake and the misconception that people have about this is that the world is static. So it's not. And even the Europe that's divided still has, countries that are willing to help Ukraine, the countries that are worried about what's going to happen if Ukraine falls. So there's a sleeping giant in Europe. There's China. I mean, I'm pretty sure China will have its say in this situation sooner or later. And I think, it's in America's interest not to allow that to happen. So that's another avenue. And I think President Trump, he's been showing interest in Ukraine's rare earth minerals, in our power plants, and so on and so forth. If he wants a business deal, if that's the way to get his attention, I think President Zelensky should be exploring the avenue, and he is.
Fantastic to catch up with you, Igor Novikov, former advisor to President Zelensky. Always one of my favourite people to have on the programme. He just cuts through it all, doesn't he? I loved his analogy of it is like someone robbing your neighbour's house, and it turns out that somebody is the person you've got a lot of business with, and if you suddenly go after that person, you might find yourself really badly impacted. And so what do? You say, OK, they've nicked your telly, you can have my old telly from the loft. Oh, all right, yeah, we'll set up a neighbourhood watch group. Yeah. Oh no, I can't tell them to lay off because they might hurt me. Brilliant analogy there. Right, we're going to take a short break now. When we come back, we're going to be discussing yet again more gender madness. The conversation's been all about toxic masculinity these last few days, given that the huge over-promotion, quite frankly, of that rather boring Netflix series, Adolescence. I watched it. I can't tell you I was particularly riveted by it. People are loving it in the press, though, because it's an opportunity to poke the finger of blame at the white working class teenage boys. You're monsters. Look at you. You don't respect women. Are they ever going to have the conversation about who really doesn't respect women in this country? That's what I want to know. I think I'll probably wait until hell freezes over for that to happen. But now just more nonsense on our university campuses. We're going to be discussing the latest headache when it comes to gender madness with the one and only Kelly J. Keane, founder of Let Women Speak, from what is always her rather fantastic studio. That's coming up after this.
Are you saying you're expecting the Tory party to do well in the local elections? Because the polls are not suggesting that.
We do know that this set of elections will be difficult because we're coming off the high watermark of 2021, where we gained an extraordinary 65% of all seats up for election. So it's going to be very difficult to meet that. But if you look at local by-elections, in the last few months since the general election, we've actually won 59 seats. To give you some idea, Reform, for example, have won 12.
£3.5 billion in public spending, infrastructure, public services, housing, healthcare, education, public transport, etc. So altogether, we have 1.2 million foreign nationals who are costing us in benefits and infrastructure investment £11 billion a year. Is that the idea of immigration?
Vladimir Putin has shown over and over again that he uses agreements, talks, to reposition himself, re-equip himself. So we've seen this before, and we've seen this with Ukraine. Assurance
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome back to the show. Now, do you know what? There's a lot of conversations going on right now, yet again, about toxic masculinity because of that appalling series on Netflix, which I watched and I didn't think it was up to much, to be honest. Pretty boring, but if you've got 4 hours of your life to spare and don't want to pull your eyeballs out, I suppose it's a viable enough alternative. And so everyone's talking once again about toxic masculinity online. Oh, it's all Andrew Tate's fault. Look, I think the man's a bozo. I don't particularly care for that weird-looking Malteser. But now Amnesty International have come out with this report saying 6 in 10 Gen Zers are being driven offline because of toxic bro culture. And the people that Amnesty International UK are blaming, of course, because he's to blame for everything, isn't he, is Donald Trump and Elon Musk and JD Vance. They're so wicked, they're so nasty, they're evil, they're behind everything that's wrong in the world. Well, let's speak to Kelly J. Keane, founder of Let Women Speak. Kelly J, I love having you on the show. How are you doing, my darling?
Yes, I'm great, thank you. How are you?
Look at that awesome studio and look at that awesome woman. Gosh, you're glamorous. I want to talk about this first of all, because, one thing that I really like about especially JD Vance since Trump's come into office is this push about family. Have babies, have a nuclear family. Being a man is being a good father. And actually, when you look at Donald Trump and the administration in America, it's a family affair. Every single kid's involved. They're all married. The grandchildren are on stage. You've got that really tall one, I forget his name, who everyone seems to fawn over now. You've got Kai Trump. I mean, I think it's actually a positive message about men and the role of men in society. And yet, good old Amnesty International UK are saying it's toxic bro culture. What are your thoughts?
Well, Amnesty International don't seem to know what men and women are, so I don't know if we should really listen to them on anything at any point ever. And they're pro all types of very harmful things towards women, whether it's prostitution or surrogacy, whatever it is, they back it as long as it's something to punish women. When it comes to masculinity and toxic masculinity, often I get into trouble with feminists for this because I will posit the idea like, okay, let's say I agree with you, toxic masculinity exists, which I don't, but let's say I do. Can you tell me what just masculinity is?
Right.
And, as far as I'm concerned, toxic masculinity, or what they call it, is bad behavior. Whoever does it, I don't really see how it's connected at all to masculinity.
Right, this is the point. There are people who are just downright rotters who do terrible things. Certainly there are men, like you brought up, eyeballing way too much pornography. And this is having a very detrimental impact on society, both to men and to women. People often don't talk about the fact that men's brains are being neurologically rewired and they're becoming depressive addicts just sitting in their mother's basements watching videos online. But no, we're not ever having those conversations. We just keep pointing the finger of blame at men, whereas if you're a man who wants to, I don't know, join the Olympic swimming team, go ahead. If you haven't had any gender reassignment surgery but want to get your wang out in a woman's changing rooms, that's fine. You're brilliant, you're courageous and you're brave. Well, now we've found out the new International Olympic Committee President, Kirsty Coventry, is facing immediate calls to protect the women's category after securing a landslide election win. She is, of course, replacing Sebastian Coe, Lord Coe, who lost the election race. And good old Sharon Davis, forever defending women's sports, has blasted the International Olympic Committee and says women's sports must be protected. How many more times do we need to have this debate? We saw that man pummeling that poor wee lass in the boxing ring during the Olympics. Everybody shuddered watching her face be turned into a car crash by someone who physically was clearly very different. And yet this isn't yet resolved.
Well, it's really funny because we keep having to have reports and reviews and all these things, and they're all such a massive waste of time because we all know from, I don't know, experience, maybe just one day on Earth, we know that there is a clear difference between men and women when it comes to physiology, and when it comes to all sorts of things. There's all sorts of ways that men and women are different. Biological, who knew? Like the body that you're born in actually makes a difference. I'm sure I'd be an unbearable person if I was a 5'10" woman. I can tell you that. So, and I'm quite unbearable, and I'm only 5'1". So I just think there's this push. You've also got women driving this, and it's very odd that this Coventry lady, she's going to push this nonsense of men and women's sports far harder than Sebastian Coe would ever agree to. So it is painful, isn't it, to see these women just give away our rights all the time.
I want to talk about this. I'm glad you brought this up, because me and the other half talk about this a lot. And I always say to him, do you know, one of the biggest blights on modern society when it comes to all of this dangerous woke stuff that really hurts women, whether it's opening the door to a load of men from countries where they actually stone women to death and make them dress up as ghosts, or whether it's sort of, you know, waving the placards for a man, you know, putting on a frock with a massive beard, going and doing, you know, unspeakable acts in women's toilets. The people who seem to champion this are the sort of well-educated, you know, suburban metropolitan elite women who seem to think it's like the latest Gucci handbag. What is wrong with them?
Well, maybe they should get themselves a Gucci handbag, and then maybe they wouldn't be so preoccupied with giving away our rights. I think it comes from a luxury, and I think it comes because all of these policies really are about signalling that you're nice. And I know virtue signal is a word that people use all the time, but it's a code that women use with each other, a competitive code to say, I'm a nicer person than you. So this is what I do. It's nothing about being nice. Women often excuse themselves and say, I'm just too empathetic. I'm so nice. I'm so kind. No, none of those things are true. This is your social currency, and this is what women use against each other to compete against each other about who is the nicest and who could possibly be nicer than that woman who feels sorry for that poor man with his poor dress who just wants to get unchanged in front of our daughters.
It's mad. I saw something you had said online that was extremely bold and something I've always wanted to talk about. And it's only 11:55. It's still the morning time on Friday. But let's try and do it in gentle terms that aren't going to get me in trouble with the regulator. And that is talking about this sort of Venn diagram of men who put on women's clothes and those who are, let's say, genuinely gender dysphoric. And those who, frankly, just get a kick out of it, and things such as autogynephilia. Because I don't think this is brought up enough. People don't know that word, and they don't actually realise that for a lot of men who fancy being a woman for the day, it's actually, well, a fetish.
Yeah, I don't think we do talk about it enough. And actually, even when we acknowledge that so the fetish autogynephilia is where a man is aroused by seeing himself as a woman. So he puts himself in that position. And part of that will be making women uncomfortable with him erasing her boundaries. So it'll be they will enjoy going into women's changing rooms, not for validation, but genuinely there's an added thrill about making women feel uncomfortable. And it's all about boundary erosion. And we know that many fetishes are about boundary erosion. In fact, many male sort of powerful abuse of women is around boundary erosion and being able to exert one's power over a woman. So we know this, and yet we seem to want to pretend that it's all right, and that there are occasions where that man with his fetish can maybe, I don't know, go into a school, go into a hospital, carry on his working day. And we wouldn't do it if his fetish was, I don't know, wearing rubber or wearing a mask. Except for obviously during lockdown, but we wouldn't allow that man with that sort of fetish to go in and parade it around children. But this fetish, somehow they've managed to sanitize to the point that people just can pretend that that isn't what their motivation is.
And this is the problem. Rather than talk about that, you've got the future leaders at places like Oxford University instead messing about with the Latin language, which has a feminine and a masculine, to make it gender neutral. I mean, it's centuries Latin's been used in degree ceremonies where people have been referred to as masters, ladies and gentlemen, but now there are proposals to amend that language to make it more inclusive. The problem is with nonsense like this, you might look at that and go, who gives a stuff whether Oxford University changes its Latin and its degree ceremonies? But stuff like this ends up being the distraction. And we're not talking about men coming from other cultures where they're creepy around women who happen to be wearing a miniskirt. And we're not talking about men who might get a kick out of putting on a dress and making little girls feel uncomfortable when they want to go to the swimming baths.
Yeah, quite right. And I think with Oxford, it's the epitome of hypocrisy, isn't it? It kind of doesn't. Inclusion and Oxford, when we look at the amount of children that go from poorer families and get into Oxford, I think it's quite hilarious that they talk about inclusion at all. But yeah, you're right. We don't talk about the things that need to be talked about because they're far too difficult to fix. You know, it's very difficult to fix the idea that women are feeling more and more unsafe on our streets. It's much better to say that women should include these men in our changing rooms because
make themselves less safe. That's what it beggars belief. Oh, Kelly J, keep up the good work that you do. I adore you. Kelly J Keane, founder of Let Women Speak. Now, before we go to break, breaking news. Guess what, ladies and gentlemen? The Metropolitan Police's Counter-Terrorism Command is now leading that investigation into the cause of the fire at the electrical substation in West London that led to the closure of Heathrow Airport, the force has said. Who would have thunk? An attack on critical infrastructure? An accident? Pull the other one. Right, going to take a short break now. I'll keep you updated on that story. We're going to be talking about the economy as well after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, welcome back to the show. And I hate to say I told you so, but I kind of did, didn't I? Turns out the Metropolitan Police's Counter-Terrorism Command is now leading the investigation into the cause of the fire at an electrical substation in West London that led to the entire closure of one of the world's busiest airports, Europe's busiest airport, our busiest airport, Heathrow, of course. Now, we don't know. This is an investigation, so we can't jump to conclusions and say, well, this is clearly a deliberate attack on critical infrastructure. But the fact they're now leading that investigation tends to suggest they might have gone in, looked at the scene and gone, funny that the entire electrical substation seemed to self-immolate, spontaneously combust in the early hours of the morning, and with it, the backup generators. Who could be behind it? We are going to be speaking to it. We're reaching out right now to speak to various people who are experts in this matter to get their thoughts on it. Of course, we don't know anything. This is entirely speculation at this point. But the breaking news is that the Metropolitan Police's Counter-Terrorism Command is now leading the investigation into the cause of that fire. And in other unremarkable news of today is the fact that the growth forecast for this country has now been halved in a big blow to Keir Starmer. Do you remember that general election campaign, the snap election? The only thing people were talking about, Sunak and Starmer, growth. No, we're for growth. We're going to bring the growth. No, you haven't brought growth. We're going to bring the growth. No. You don't know how growth is done because you just tax people too much. Well, you don't know how growth is done because you've not been able to do it. And it turns out that now the Labour government have come in with their crazy budget last year. And their crazy net zero policies and their inability to control migration. That, guess what? The growth forecast has now been halved by Labour Party's beloved Office for Budget Responsibility, who they actually canonised with even more powers to tell the Treasury what it should and shouldn't do. Well, even though apparently the OBR gets to mark all of Rachel Reeves' homework and truss her up in a straitjacket to make sure she doesn't completely decimate the economy, it still wasn't good enough because our growth is only going to be, guess what, ladies and gentlemen? 1%! Let's speak now to Liam Halligan, one of my favourite economist and journalists. Liam, I mean, I wasn't exactly expecting the big guns to come out and be like, woohoo, let's fire some celebratory cannons. Growth is now running at 7%. We can all start popping bottles of champagne down the city of London. Britain's back in the game. It's now been hard. I mean, I don't really need to ask you this, but what is behind this devastating forecast?
One of your favourite economists, Alex. What's going on?
Oh, no.
You're downgrading me.
When it comes to economy, you are the number one. But if you want to talk about women's matters that we were doing before the break, be my guest. I mean, I love it.
Great to be on the show, Alex. Look, this is a big blow for Rachel Reeves, a big blow for Keir Starmer. It's shocking, but not surprising. The Bank of England lowered its growth forecast from 1.5% for this year to 0.75%. In February they did that, and now we've got a report in the Telegraph, which is the paper I write for, of course. It's a very, very well-sourced report by a highly regarded journalist saying that when it comes to the spring statement next week, of course, on Wednesday, Rachel Reeves will stand up on her hind legs in the Commons and give another budget, as she did back in October. The OBR, the official fiscal watchdog, is going to lower its budget forecast. What we know so far is it's currently 2% to, quotes, around 1%. What does that mean? That sounds like inane numbers. What's this man going on about? What I'm going on about is the fact that the economy is stalled, and that means that there's less tax revenue going into the government's coffers, and that means that spending is going to have to be curtailed. And everyone knows the economy is stalled, and a big reason it's stalled, Alex, is because of Rachel Reeves' Halloween budget back at the end of October. That it didn't introduce any tax rises. It announced them, the tax rises themselves, the big increase in employer national insurance, other aspects, the increase in the minimum wage that's going to hammer a lot of employers. They don't come in until early April, right? Next month, the beginning of the fiscal year. But just the prospect of those tax rises plus changes to business rates, all kinds of other taxes on business have stalled the economy. Hiring is now falling at its fastest rates since the beginning of the COVID pandemic. Manufacturing is being hammered by a range of net zero policies, as you said in your introduction, Alex. And that is why the economy is, I don't really want to say this, but it's probably true that the economy has contracted in the first couple of months of this year. That's certainly what the survey data suggests, surveys of business leaders. That's what I think the official figures on growth will confirm when they come out. They come out, of course, with a delay. And ahead of Rachel Reeves' spring statement on next Wednesday, the danger is, as they did back in October, rather than thinking, crikey, the public finances are in a mess, crikey, the national debt is really high, let's get the economy growing, to solve that problem. They're going to think there's a big hole in the public finances, let's tax it more. That will just make the public finances even worse. Because you know what, Alex? It was Winston Churchill who said, trying to tax yourself into prosperity is like a man standing in a bucket trying to lift himself up.
I mean, this actually comes down to the good old Laffer curve, or something that everyone
Alex,
loves that
you know
Laffer
how
curve.
to excite a man. You know how to talk.
Oh, I
talk to
know.
economists.
Hey, guess what? I actually met Laffer when I was in America in January. I didn't realise he still existed. I thought he might be someone who wasn't any longer on the planet, but had some really good thoughts. But he's a man. I met him. Now, explain to the audience about the Laffer curve, because people toss this around as much as they say Overton window in this day and age. But do you think we've hit it, or do you think really the worst is going to come in April when the employer's national insurance tax rise actually impacts?
Who says you can't do detailed economics on mainstream radio? Here we are, Alex, on talkTV, two hacks like us, and we're talking about Art Laffer, the famous American economist who drew on a napkin to one of Reagan's economic advisors a curve which was a brilliant way of capturing the idea, which is obvious when you think about it. The more you raise tax rates, the more growth is going to be crushed, the more people are going to try and do things to avoid paying the tax. So you get to a point where a tax rate gets so high that to increase it even more means you get less revenue because there's less economic activity and people take more steps to avoid the tax. That is the Laffer curve. Look, the Laffer curve, if you raise tax rates even more, you're going to get even less tax by crushing growth. I think we're at that point now, even beyond it, Alex. Think about corporation tax. One of the most important taxes for determining whether businesses actually build that extra factory, whether they take on that extra worker. You know, if it's a small business or a medium size or a big business, corporation tax is absolutely vital. As the Tories rightly lowered the rate of corporation tax from 2010 onwards, from high 20% down to 19%, George Osborne and David Cameron did that, and fair play to them. The actual amount of tax that they got from corporation tax, the actual amount of revenue, went up. It went up enormously. As a share of GDP, it went up, even though the tax rate went from 28% to 19%. And that is the Laffer curve in action. And I think we're at a point now with the tax burden already at a 70-year high, tax as a share of GDP. That was a nice economic inheritance which the Tories, or the so-called Tories, gave to Labour when they came in July. That wasn't Labour's fault. But Labour, and Rachel Reeves in particular, who's much, much more ideological than a lot of the kind of Blair-era finance ministers, maybe even more left-wing and ideological, I would say, than Gordon Brown himself, who is her economic political hero. I think she has doubled down. She's tried to get the economy moving, or get government spending moving by taxing more. She gave a massive bung to the public sector unions as she came into office. And guess what? She spent a long time talking down the economy, talking about a £22 billion black hole, which in the words of outgoing Institute for Fiscal Studies boss Paul Johnson, an extremely respectable bloke, black hole which was completely obvious for anyone who dared to look. They were his words. And when you talk down the economy, it's all very well when you're sitting on the opposition benches playing student politics, throwing buns at the government. But when you are the British government and you are running the 5th biggest economy in the world and you are slagging off your own economy, guess what? People stop investing.
Exactly. It's madness. Absolute madness. That little Art Laffer, he's only a slight man. I should have kidnapped him, bundled him into a suitcase and brought him to Britain and said, dude, you've got to help us. How delicate is our situation, though? Because you were saying that, you know, some of these sort of more egregious tax rises, employers' national insurance, which is already having an impact as, you know, companies try and mitigate for the fallout from this down the line, but that hasn't actually hit yet. How delicate is our situation? You talk about the cost of government borrowing. We know that when it comes to global inflation, these things are sort of affected by ongoing war in Russia, energy supplies. Great GB Energy, brilliant. They've just spent 200 million of the 8.3 billion they've robbed from the UK taxpayer to put windmills in fields and allow Ed Miliband to play ukuleles on TikTok. But could we really enter a point under this Labour government where we find out that we have to basically knock on the door of the IMF and go, we've really stuffed things up?
Well, you and I have talked about this in the past, Alex. We've talked about the IMF crisis of 1976, when the British government went literally cap in hand to America for a bailout. That was, I've dubbed that Britain's economic Suez. That was when we ceased to be, in the eyes of the world, you know, a proper world-class economy. I think that reputation was regained during the reforms of the 80s and into the 90s. I think both Tory and Labour governments managed the economy pretty well over recent years, until we got, I think, to the mid-2010s, and then things started to really go wrong. Even in what we called those so-called austerity years, the national debt doubled to 80% of GDP, and then, of course, it went up to 100% of GDP during the madness that was our stringent COVID lockdown. Look, at the moment, we've just had government borrowing figures coming out. The government borrowed 10.7 billion quid last month, right, in 1 month. If Liz Kendall gets these welfare reforms through Parliament, and that's not in their current form, and that's not a given, they'll probably be watered down, but if she does, that's going to save the government with all that political pain, with all that fire and brimstone, with, let's be clear, lots of people who should get benefits not getting benefits, even though lots of people who shouldn't be getting benefits don't get benefits. You know, there's going to be human pain. You and I would agree with that. If all that pain is exerted, the British government is going to save roughly 5 billion quid a year on welfare reform, right?
Gosh.
We're borrowing 10 billion quid a month.
So, I mean, this is the thing. The Labour Party...
A lot of the money we are borrowing, Alex...
Yeah.
Strap yourself in, right? A lot of the money we are borrowing to pay the interest on our existing government debt. That is where we are. I say this often, and nobody wants to kind of clock it.
Yeah.
If you ran a business like that, you'd be struck off.
But in the context of other developed nations, how sort of, you know, how much in lockstep with them are we? Because it sounds ghoulish, it sounds harrowing, but we're not exactly alone in being in that situation, are we?
We're not, but it's like an ugly baby competition, right? Who's the ugliest baby? And look, here's the thing. You know, other big nations have got really big debts to GDP. But, you know, the UK, we are very dependent on external creditors, so people from overseas lending us money. We are very dependent on imported energy, and the net zero policies, I think, are exposing that energy dependence much, much more. And also, you know, in the end, it doesn't matter if everyone else is in a really bad situation. You're still going to get hammered by the financial markets. You know, what the government pays to borrow is now way above what it was, the interest rate at the height of, you know, the Liz Truss mini budget crisis. The interest rate is now much, much higher that the government has to spend in order to borrow money. If we managed our finances better, if we had policies that encourage growth, then that's the way to fix your public finances. Then interest rates would come down. You know, the Bank of England just held interest rates earlier this week, right? Base rates, though it has been lowering them in recent months. And yet, even though the Bank of England's been lowering those base rates, the rate at which the Bank of England lends to commercial banks, we're really getting into some economics now.
Well, we are. I'm beginning to lose you, Liam, I must admit.
You're tingling with excitement. You're tingling with excitement. Even though the Bank of England has been lowering interest rates in financial markets, the rates that actually matter when you're going to borrow money for a business or another personal loan, they've been going up.
Right.
Because of government policy.
Now, what is the way out of this?
Because of what the market charges the government to borrow, which is the benchmark for everything else.
What is the way out of this? Because you brought up net zero. We know that Whitehall is going to be facing spending cuts of 11% in the emergency budget to balance the nation's book. What I'd call a gentle doging, you know, getting rid of NHS England. It's hardly...
Doge is a verb.
It's like it's a gentle doge, isn't it? It's sort of a little sort of, you know, a tickling doge. It's hardly Miele's chainsaw going at the civil service. But what is the solution? Should we be looking over across the Atlantic at what's going on in America and the super Doge, Doge on steroids, as well as drill baby drill, and going, that is going to work. Do we know that that's going to work? Is it working in America? Should we be having some of that medicine?
Well, America is, an exception, because America's got what's called the world's reserve currency, right? People will demand the dollar. It's the world's hard currency. It's always a lot easier for America to manage its economy and take more liberties with its public finances because it's America, because it has the dollar. We don't have a reserve. We are not a reserve currency anymore, sterling, though sometimes our policymakers act as if we are. And we do need to watch our step. We absolutely need to watch our step. Financial markets are concerned about the rate of government borrowing, and it will be very interesting to see how markets respond to Rachel Reeves's budget spring statement next week. It may not be the stuff of front page headline news, because of course the papers and the broadcasters will rightly focus on how individual households and firms are affected by the measures. But the really big story about Rachel Reeves's spring statement next week is what happens to those gilt yields, as I call them, the interest rate that the government must pay to borrow. That's what Treasury officials will be most nervous about. The way to get out of a jam in the public finances, in a democracy, you're never going to be able to just massively cut spending, right? You're just not going to be able to. You can slow down the rate of growth of spending, right? Which is what these welfare reforms are about. And you can make some headline cuts that, make people feel that we're really trying. And the civil service has to be right. The number of civil servants has gone up by over a third in the last 8 years.
What?
Right? Yeah, it's gone up by 130,000 in the last 8 years. Right? Even though we've had, email and all these things that are meant to be more productive and more efficient, and, AI and, all these rudimentary, paperwork, stamps, bureaucratic tasks are now so much more efficient. And yet the number of civil servants has gone up by 34% since 2016. Right?
Do you know, Liam...
We have to cut the civil service. We have to make certain cuts that encourage that convince financial markets that the British government
But we're serious. This is it. I mean, when I look at things like that Motability scheme, handing out free cars, the 20-odd thousand civil service credit cards where they're buying themselves shoes in Barbados, I kind of want my doging not to be so much of a warm B-day as the full colonic to get rid of the waste. Liam Halligan, economist and journalist, my absolute favourite. Thank you ever so much. Right, when we come back after the break, we're going to be focusing our attention back on what is going on at Heathrow. Don't go anywhere. I'm back after this.
aid. Agreements were signed between Russia and other countries about protecting the integrity, the independence and the sovereignty of Ukraine, particularly at the point when Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons arsenal.
There was a big round. I think the Tories gave judges the power to do.
So why they're not using it?
Well, some of them think it's. Some of them, some of them are, doing 10 cases a week. So there is definitely. I totally agree with you, especially for if you're found guilty, you've been callous enough to push it to a trial. If you actually very obviously you did it, and then at the last minute, that one moment, the victims, the family, the public can get that sort of moment of justice. To deny them that, I mean, it's just, yeah, you're right.
I mean,
are you saying you're expecting the Tory party to do well in the local elections? Because the polls are not suggesting that.
We do know that this set of elections will be difficult because we're coming off the high watermark of 2020.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Right, let's just get on with getting on, because now we know that the Metropolitan Police's Counter-Terrorism Command is leading the investigation into the cause of the fire at the electrical substation that took out both the substation and the backup generators that feed the power at Heathrow Airport, causing the entire airport to close down. I think it's time that we engage in a bit of whodunit, and who better to play that game with than Big Phil, Philip Ingram, MBE, former senior military intelligence officer. Philip, as soon as I saw this story, I said to Ted, it's time for Big Phil. Get him on. Right, when you saw this, right, the electrical substation catching fire to such a degree, including the backup generators that Heathrow's completely out of action, did your spidey senses say there's probably something fishy going on here?
Well, not probably. I said there could be something fishy going on here in the back of my mind, because this is straight out of the GRU, which is Russia's first intelligence directorate, their military intelligence organization, the same organization that carried out the attack on Sergei Skripal in Salisbury. It's straight out of their playbook. Identify a key bit of critical national infrastructure that controls an even bigger bit of critical national infrastructure and attack it. However, it's probably just a complete and utter cock-up, and lots of different things have come together. But it's appropriate that Counter-Terrorism Command lead the initial investigation, just in case there is something nefarious about it.
I mean, talking about the sort of things that the GRU, for instance, and we know that the IRG as well, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, they're sort of teeming inside the UK. Talking about the sort of things they have successfully done, the sort of acts of arson they have perpetrated in Britain.
Well, we've seen a couple of them. We've seen warehouses that were storing equipment that was being sent off to Ukraine, just outside London, mysteriously burned down. We have had notorious parcel bombs put into DHL depots for loading onto aircraft, not just in the UK, but also in Germany. And all of these have been pointed back to the Russians. There hasn't been anything definitive where people can hang their hat and say, we have got clear evidence that the Russians are doing this. But if it's only the intelligence agencies that know it, they're never going to bring that out into the public domain. They will have quiet words behind closed doors with their counterparts in Russia and elsewhere. And this is, there are too many coincidences coming together. And as soon as you get a convergence of coincidences, you start to look at, from an investigative perspective, you have to rule out something that could be nefarious.
Right, and in terms of those coincidences, it's interesting. I mean, I couldn't help but sort of notice, really, that the whole debate around a ceasefire in Ukraine has been based upon a ceasefire on critical infrastructure. Yeah. And actually what Russia has been doing is bombarding Ukraine's critical infrastructure. Then we suddenly find our own critical infrastructure has caught on fire at the same time that we're sort of saying we're going to fly RAF planes over the Ukraine, we're going to put boots on the ground, we're going to make sure that our nuclear deterrents are up and running. We've been talking tough on this. How worrying is it, though, that at least, even if this is, as you said, the metaphorical, mess up, I don't know if I'm allowed to say what you said according to Ofcom, but don't worry, I didn't say it. so that's fine. I'll just apologise on your behalf. Even if it is that, and we don't know anything, and it is appropriate that we investigate all avenues, does this now raise a question of the fact that our critical infrastructure just doesn't seem to be defended?
Yeah, well, you've hit the nail on the head. There isn't resilience in our critical infrastructure. And if we can close down the busiest airport in the world, one of the busiest airports in the world, in Europe, by one little electrical fire in a substation, what else can be closed down by something where you're attacking something that's off-site? And I know when I've done targeting for different operations, looking at attacking critical infrastructure, you always find this one critical piece that is effectively the big switch where you can turn the whole site off. And it's also tends to be something that's very difficult to get the replacement parts for and get them in quickly. So you can have a massive effect by attacking a tiny little piece. Now, there's no evidence at the moment that this was an attack, anything more than just a series of circumstances and an accident and a fire. But counter-terror police will get to the bottom of it as quickly as they possibly can.
But, I mean, I'm not expecting you to suddenly become the world's expert at energy grids and electrical substations, but how on earth...
I've attacked a few in my times.
Oh, good. Well, maybe you are then. But how on earth does what appears to be a very important electrical substation, if it's feeding power into one of the world's busiest airports, and one assumes that means that everything from security to air traffic control, are all affected, how on earth does that thing spontaneously combust in the wee small hours of the morning and take out all of the backup generators as well?
Well, again, this is something that your London Fire Brigade will be trying to get to the bottom of as quickly as possible. A lot of this, the technology is creaking, it's old, and things do just go wrong. That happens to everything around your house and all the rest of it. We find houses mysteriously just catch fire because something starts sparking in a particular room. So it's very difficult to pin it down. The fire brigade will do that, but it's ruling out anything that's deliberate is key. The big question here is, why has this one incident in one place had such a major effect on a major airport? And this is where resilience across Heathrow and resilience across all of our other elements of critical national infrastructure are going to have to be reviewed very quickly indeed.
Oh, Phil, thank you ever so much for coming on the programme. Always brilliant to have you there, and always pragmatic as well. He says it's probably just a big old see-up, and I'm there going, it's probably nefarious activity. I can't help it. I just, I look at patterns in geopolitics, and I'm always suspicious. I always think, where there's coincidence, where there's convenience, there's usually some sort of nefarious activity at play. Anyway, right, going to take a short break now, but when I come back, I'm going to be joined by the one and only Mr. Kevin O'Sullivan, chief misanthropist of them all, in the studio, and we're just going to rant about everything, really. You don't want to miss it. Back after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the programme. Now, I always say how the 90s was peak civilization. Those were the days when it was really cool for a woman to wear baggy trousers and a vest and knock back a pint of lager, where racism didn't really exist. Black and white people just got on with getting on. We had some really good music around at the time as well, unlike the sort of dross that is pumped out on, Spotify accounts the world over today. In fact, none of it is pumped out because they're all listening to music from the 90s because it was better. And if that is you, you might want to enter this competition.
How do you fancy winning tickets to the hottest gig of the century? Here at Talk, we're giving you the chance to bag yourself a pair of tickets to Oasis at Wembley this summer. Plus, we're giving away a whopping 10 grand and putting you up for the weekend in a London hotel. All you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 and you're in the draw. Alternatively, you can enter by post. Once again, all you need to do is text the word prize to 83338 or you can enter by post. Good luck.
18 plus UK excluding Northern Ireland. Enter by text for £2 plus one standard network charge by 11 p.m. on the 7th of April 2025. Or post your name and number to Oasis Competition, PO Box 3190. Colchester CO2 8GP to arrive by 5 p.m. on the 10th of April 2025. Full terms and conditions at talksport.com.
This is a News Broadcasting Network promotion.
Right, grow out those eyebrows, scraggle up the hair. It's Oasis time, ladies and gentlemen, and good luck if you're entering the competition. Right, welcome to the studio, the one and only Mr. Kevin O'Sullivan.
Hello, Alex. That's a nice pair you got.
What?
Pick it up. Pick it up. Pick it up.
This is what he's talking
about.
Yeah.
So we just had this idea that I would say that.
Yeah.
That's a nice pair you got. And then
he said to me, Alex, whatever you do, when I say nice pair in the innuendo, you've got to show the viewers that you've been eating a pear.
Then she didn't. I knew you wouldn't. Yeah.
I know, but you knew.
Anyway,
it doesn't look.
Come to think of it, it doesn't look all that nice.
It's too crunchy.
I like a crunchy pear.
No, because I quite like it when you get all the juices running down your chin. Not convenient for studio work, but it's way too crunchy. That thing is not ripe. Nothing's more upsetting, other than underripe avocado, than an underripe pear.
Bit of a middle-class conversation, this, isn't it? Let's.
Now, pears are sort of good British.
Yeah, I suppose they are.
Fruit.
Yeah. And what's it? Side at the Perry? Is that right?
Perry comes from pears. Yeah, I've been educating him well. In fact, actually, we could go down to the cider house after this if you like.
I've got a show to do.
No,
later,
you always come up with some sort of excuse. Right, now, talk to me about your bundle of ranting that you've got lined up, ready to rip on. Because you want to talk about some Hattie Sutherland Bing Bong or something.
Well, what is that?
Some double-barreled name came into the studio.
Well, no, yes. Sorry. Yeah, well, this is the one case. I mean, you're supposed to ask me the questions, but
okay,
I will.
Kev.
No.
I'm going to ask you a
case.
question about the judge.
This is another mad tribunal judge. I say mad, moronic. You know these tribunal judges, immigration tribunal judges, who say, well, we can't send this family back because the boy, the son, doesn't like chicken nuggets made in Afghanistan or Albania, foreign. That kind of the madness of letting these paedophiles, criminals and lunatics stay. Well, the latest egregious example of these absolute idiots who preside over these immigration tribunals, these judges, is a judge, of course, called Helena Suffield Thompson. They've always got double-barreled names.
Got names like
anyway, she has allowed a migrant, an illegal migrant, to stay on the basis that if he was sent back to Iran, he would be persecuted because he had posted sort of anti-Muslim things on social media.
Some people might say fair play, there's a mad Ayatollah in charge of Iran, it's a bit of a dictatorship, you criticise the government, you might find your head in a dustbin. But
the only thing is, he wasn't supposed to be sent back to Iran, it was Iraq, where he wouldn't be persecuted. So Helena Suffield Thompson has allowed a maniac to stay here on the basis of sending him back to the wrong country. She confused Iran with Iraq. Another example of the migrant crisis madness that is engulfing this country. Have you seen it? Another 341 have come across yesterday, 289 the day before.
So do you know what? Here is what's interesting. I don't know anything about this geezer and why he's been allowed to stay, what he did and why he's being deported. And
because he faced
that and the other.
persecution in his home country. Human rights,
But apparently,
Alex.
he's an Iraqi. He campaigned against the Kurdish leadership in the UK. Kurdish leadership in the UK? Yeah. Well, he was a Kurdish leadership in the UK. And expressed his views on Facebook, such that he'd be at risk of persecution on return as a result. Thing is, though, you know who's running all of the trafficking stuff?
Yeah.
It's Kurdish gangs.
Yeah, but also in Iraq doesn't qualify as
They got Kurdistan up there in Iraq.
Doesn't persecute people. Iran does. She thought he was going back to Iran. Got the wrong country. Well done, Helena. Next.
I mean, these people are just
Taxi
absolutely...
for Suffield Thompson.
No, it's just, it's absolutely ridiculous.
Pathetic,
I just
isn't it?
can't get over it. How do we get rid of these ridiculous judges? I mean, this is the thing now. This is the big problem, though, because any government that comes in and says the judicial system's out of control, we need to get rid of the judicial system, the response will be gasps of horror that there's some sort of tyrannical overlord who wants to sort of, abolish the rule of law and become an absolutist state. It's really difficult.
Well, do you remember the one recently? His name was Hugo Norton-Taylor, of course. He's the one who decided that every single Palestinian could come and live here on the basis of what's going on in Gaza, using a specific law brought in for Ukrainian refugees, so it wasn't really lawful. Anyway, a very liberal left-wing kind of decision, which is what our judges tend to be. They're all Guardian readers these days. Oh, I'm mentioning The Guardian. Guess what his dad does? He's a journalist for The Guardian. A massive anti-Israel campaigner. So these people are politically motivated, they're left-wing, and they're morons. Not a good combo.
I don't understand the motivation of these people that, kind of want to seem so polite and lovely and bleeding heart and wonderful and generous of spirit and so wealthy, but the wealth hasn't corrupted them at all because they want to help all of the poor little migrants, that they actually go, oh yeah, rapists, you stay.
Yeah, and paedophiles.
Yeah.
Paedophiles who come out of jail who can't be sent back to, I don't know, Somalia or Syria or wherever it is they come from, on the basis that if they're sent back to Somalia or Syria, in Syria and Somalia, they persecute paedophiles. They take a dim view of paedophiles. Well, I regret to inform our judiciary that here in Britain, we take a pretty dim view of paedophiles as well. And by the way, if you've just been in jail for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years as a paedophile, a person who abused children, let's not let that person out onto our streets to put our children in danger.
The mad thing is when they come out with the excuse and they go, oh, look, this person's a proper kiddie fiddler. He needs to have access to his kids. He better stay in the country.
Exactly. What about his own
where's
kids?
the social services in all of this? It's like, hold on, he messes about with kids. And it's like, well, he better stay in this country because this is where his kids are.
And by the way, I don't care about the human rights of paedophiles. I don't care if these paedophiles get persecuted when they go back to Syria or Somalia. In fact, I'd rather applaud that. What the hell is going on
I'll tell you
here?
what, though, when you look at reports coming from Afghanistan where they have those little twerking boys, perhaps we should just send them all there. They'd be at home.
Yeah.
Let's talk now. I never know
You
when
said that, not me.
The director. I'm sorry, Afghanistan. You seem like a really lovely country, and I can't wait to put on a bin bag and come on holiday there next week. Right. Let's talk now about this kind of ridiculous story. Gary Costin, who doesn't sound like he'd be my kind of drinking buddy down the pub because he's got, beef
It's not a ridiculous story. It's a political
Tice.
asylum exclusive that we did last night.
Oh, political asylum.
Start paying this story some
okay.
respect.
It's an exclusive. I'm going to do it again. I'm not going to ask you the question.
No,
you
come
go.
on, ask me.
No.
Well,
What
look,
tell us the
seriously,
story.
Isabel Oakeshott found this guy, a guy called Gary Costin. It is actually a story that will annoy you and therefore is a good story. No, it annoys me. It will annoy you in the right way. This is a guy who served for his country. He fought in Afghanistan and Iraq, and he went on to work for the Home Office, a subcontracted security firm deporting dangerous criminals. And he used to volunteer for the particularly dangerous trips, taking rapists back to Somalia or Sierra Leone, that kind of thing. Anyway, he got in a WhatsApp group with his mates at work, and they used to post stories in their private WhatsApp group which they thought were relevant to their jobs. Now, Richard Tice, the then leader of Reform UK, posted that there was a group of workers at the Home Office who were Islamic Muslim people who they formed a lobby group to influence policy towards Muslim needs, to try to get.
No, thank you.
And they're working for the Home Office, and they wanted to influence policy. So Richard Tice found out about this and said, "This sounds like a matter for national security. This is rather worrying." So Gary Costin saw that, put this in the WhatsApp group. And that's all he put. He just put underneath it.
Yeah.
He was sacked for Islamophobic racism and bullying Muslims and creating a...
When I read the copy, when he had captioned about something Tice said, I thought he was going to be because he doesn't like Tice. It's the other way round. He's like, Tice has got a point.
Yes, exactly right. But he's basically just putting it in there. Anyway, this whistleblower, a Muslim within his group, that he still doesn't know who it was, said that this is clearly a move to persecute the Muslims who work on this kind of... He did not say that. He did not do that. He was sacked. And what we're talking about here, this is two-tier. Because if he'd have posted, these bloody Christians are causing a real problem at the Home Office, no problem at all.
Yeah,
but
all
you
these
mentioned
people silently praying outside abortion centres, they should be arrested and dragged to detention. But this is... It's so worrying. So we're going to get Islamophobia in, aren't we, as some kind of blimmin'
a new definition. The point is...
I'm in prison, aren't I?
The point is to charges of racism, we companies, corporations, organisations, the government massively overreacts every time. They don't bother to prove anything as soon as there's an accusation. This person's accused of racism, fire them. This guy's accused of Islamophobic racism. He is immediately fired. He didn't do anything wrong. 57-year-old guy with a wife and a kid talking to Isabel, broke down in tears. He's a tough guy. He's been in the war. Seriously, this is a really scandalous case and typical of what this country is turning into.
It blimmin' worries me. You and I have had many a heated conversation about Ramadan lights on Regent Street and stuff like that. But it's a problem. We know the greatest threat to national security isn't from, white extremists like that poor little kid in that adolescence thing. It's all about the white working classes. They're malign. It's those sorts of men. They're a danger to society. Look how they're being brought up from the age of 13 to be a danger to women. It's not really them that we have a problem with.
No, it's not. What we have a problem with is middle-class bleeding heart people who overreact, who are obsessed with racism, obsessed with Islamophobia. And, you've lived around the world. I've lived in America for a long time. I've been around the world. And, this is a fact. Britain is one of the least racist countries on the face of the planet. And yet we have the Guardianistas, the middle classes, who are... who are completely obsessed with making sure that everyone thinks we're dreadfully racist. This is a racist hellhole, and we've got to do something about it. It is really destroying this country.
Oh, Kev, it's wonderful to have you in the studio. It really does cheer me up. The communal catharsis, as I say.
I just say that and you go, that cheered me up.
I know, you said it was getting me the right sort of angry, and it did. I love a bit of misanthropy. Kevin O'Sullivan, ladies and gentlemen. Right, we're going to take a break now. When I come back, our final segment is going to be on what Trump is up to in America. He keeps us on our toes. Plenty of news stories coming out the other side of the pond. This time, he's closing down the entire Department of Education, basically because it's woke waste. That's coming up after this.
Vladimir Putin has shown over and over again that he uses agreements, talks, to reposition himself, re-equip himself. So we've seen this before, and we've seen this with Ukraine. Assurances were made, agreements were signed between Russia and other countries about protecting the integrity, the independence and the sovereignty of Ukraine, particularly at the point when Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons arsenal.
There was a big round. I think the Tories gave judges the power to do.
So why they're not using it?
Well, some of them don't think it's. Some of them, some of them are, doing 10 cases a week. So there is definitely. I totally agree with you, especially for if you're found guilty, you've been callous enough to push it to a trial. If you actually, very obviously, you did it, and then at the last minute, that one moment, the victims, the family, the public can get that sort of moment of justice. To deny them that, I mean, it's just, yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show. We're going to wrap things up talking about what is going on in America, because Trump has signed a big old order to basically abolish the Department of Education. He was surrounded by kids in a classroom all going, yeah, get rid of it, woo, school's out for summer. Not quite. And of course the Dems are now in a last-ditch meltdown. My understanding of this, however, it's not really the same, say, as old mad Bridget Phillips and saying I'm going to get rid of the Department of Education here. The Republicans have been wanting to get rid of this thing since the 1970s when it was established, because basically most educations should be controlled at state level anyway in their federal system. I'm not American, I don't really understand, but I know a man who does, so let's get him on the programme. It's Adam Coleman, who's columnist at the New York Post. Hi Adam, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me back on.
Oh, I love having you on. Right, tell me about this executive order to get rid of the Department for Education. What does it mean?
Essentially, actually, your brief description is actually correct. The entire point is to send education back to the states to make it more local, because it doesn't make sense for a kid in Des Moines, Iowa, to have to depend on the bureaucrats in D.C. to decide what they get to learn. And I think that's what's been happening with our federal government in general. Everything has become dictated by DC, and people who have some sort of local care and local authority have been removed from the situation because DC has all the power. So they're actually trying to shrink the federal government. Every other administration says they want to shrink the federal government. It always gets bigger. But for the first time, we're actually seeing departments that are redundant being eliminated.
Is there a worry, though? Because, I mean, I get the American system and it's all about devolving back down to state level. It's a federal government. But is there not a worry now that rather than education being standardised across America, because I understand that one thing that the Department for Education sort of did was have oversight into the teaching of social and cultural mores, which no doubt, of course, was massively woke, because whenever you get these government departments, they always are. But is there not a risk now that, say, kids in schools in the Bible Belt will be taught creationism, whereas kids in California will be, shouting about queers for Palestine?
I mean, I think that's something that was going to happen no matter what. It's not to say that there aren't issues already when it comes to having the Department of Education. I think we're just going to have different types of issues. I don't think anyone really believes this is going to make all problems disappear. But I think what this does is it at least gets towards the original purpose. The original purpose was for the federal government to be small and the states to have as much control as they possibly can. And when it comes to teaching children, which is a very personal and in-person action, I think we should have the most local way possible to teach our kids. And so if a bureaucrat in DC decides that everyone must learn this, and they all get together and it's 20 people who are having some committee, and they all decide that these 20 people get to dictate what millions of kids have to learn, that doesn't make sense to me either.
I want to talk to you now about good old Elon, because he's been having a bit of a rough old time lately, dozing by day, posting on X by night, while people have been setting fire to Teslas and the board has been demanding he steps down. Is our Elon okay, do you reckon?
That's a good question. Is he okay? You know, I think he's taking it with stride, but I think he's determined, and you know, I think he has enough clout and money to feel like he can just do what he needs to do. Whether his board wants him to step down or not, and whether he'll do it, is a different story. Well, time will tell. But I think there's going to be a lot of reaction, and I think he knew that there's going to be a lot of reaction to him being part of the Trump administration as an advisor. I think he knew, and I'm pretty sure he predicted that there's going to be targets on his back because of his involvement with the Trump administration. So I think that some of this may die down over time, but unfortunately, yes, there are people who are vandalizing Teslas all across the country. But at the same time, most of them, especially when they go viral, have been prosecuted.
And do you think doging is all going according to plan? Because it's always good to get an American take on this. We're watching from the UK thinking, oh, we'd like a little go on that melee chainsaw at some point. Hand it over here, would you? But there have been some very radical steps taken. What sort of impact is this having on America as a whole, on the mood in America, on people who might be losing their jobs, also on things like the American economy?
Well, if you're a federal worker, you're not happy with Doge. Because the mindset has been for a long time, if you work for the federal government, you basically have a job for life. It's hard to get rid of you. You're protected by unions. And whether you're a good employee, bad employee, doesn't matter. You get to stay as long as you want. It also doesn't matter if your job is redundant. And so that extra security that no other American has who works in the private world is gone for them. And so, of course, they're going to be upset. Everyone could see that. Anyone who was making money off of the federal government is pissed off when it comes to Doge. However, most Americans, the vast majority of Americans, do not work for the federal government. And so most Americans understand that, hey, I don't want to pay a bunch of taxes for jobs that shouldn't exist, that do redundant things, that are giving money to foreign aid, under the guise of foreign aid, that pull off all types of weird objectives. I don't want to do that. And yes, I'm perfectly fine with slashing the federal government where it makes sense. So I think if you wanted Doge to do these things, which the mandate was for Trump to get in office and cut and slash anything that is ridiculous, that is redundant, and could be sent to the states, he's doing it. And so if you voted for that, you like it. If you did not vote for it, you're very upset.
Indeed, as will always be the case. Adam Coleman, thank you ever so much, columnist at the New York Post. Now, I must say, you might have noticed, if you didn't, then good, you might have noticed Adam is my third guest today to use a swear word on the programme, so I'm going to apologise on his behalf. You're not going to do that, though, are you, Ian Collins?
No, but I see what I'm going to do.
I'm like the Ofcom force field at the moment. I'm like, sorry, Ofcom, everyone keeps using naughty words. I'm not sure what's on the list and what's not on the list, but I'm pretty sure what Adam just said is on the list.
The list is hilarious reading, especially after a couple of pints.
Do you know, wouldn't it be quite funny to play the game of read the list where you wouldn't be able to say anything on the list? Or maybe you could, because actually, according to the list, if you're quoting something, do you know what was the whole... It was the James Cleverly, quoting what James Cleverly apparently said about calling a place an S-hole.
Yes.
Now, there's a whole debate because Michelle Hussein had sort of direct quoted him and it was deemed OK because it was a direct quote. So do you think we could do an article all about what's on the Ofcom list and read out what's on the Ofcom list as an item of fact, and Ofcom wouldn't do anything about reading all those words?
There are times that in context, at the right time of day, you can say certain things. Of course, I'll tell you what I can do right now. For the first and only time in my career, a line that I thought was the funniest thing I'd ever seen on a Carry On movie, I can actually deliver it right now. When I look at you, Alex, I can say, what a lovely pair.
There we go. Here it is again.
There it is. It's the Barbara Windsor line.
Yeah, it's not a lovely pair. You're welcome to it.
It was the paramedic outside the eating a pear outside a hospital, and Barbara Windsor goes, "Oh, what a lovely pear!" And he says, "You took the words right out of my mouth." And it's the old proper Carry On humour back in the
Carry
day.
On.
It was harmless stuff, right?
Do you know what I've started to do, actually? My brother comes and stays with me a couple of nights a week when he works up in London. And, you know, you kind of think, oh, what should we do on an evening? Sometimes we might go out and do something in the outside world. But I've been a bit poorly, so I'm like, oh, let's just put on a film. And instead of playing the Netflix game of what rubbish is on there now and spend half an hour going through and decide you don't don't want any of it. I said, well, let's just watch all the classic movies we've never seen.
That's great.
So we watched 12 Angry Men the other night. That was brilliant.
Yep.
They don't make stuff like that. Just basically one scene of these 12 people on a jury in one room debating over whether a guy is innocent or guilty, and that's all it is. Just all brilliant dialogue.
You know, every now and again a newspaper will do a column of the classic movies you should have seen, the 50 top ones. And you look at them and to your shame you go, God, I've only seen about 10 of these. So I should watch. You're absolutely right. Don't monkey around on Netflix searching forever.
Then you still don't know. List.
Go to the list.
Yeah, because we watched Witness for the Prosecution. That started it off. We watched the old black and white version. I was like, this is good.
The Hand That Rocked